And I think the person who is most prominent that represents that best, that evil disguised as goodness, is James Talarico.
The person that Allie thinks is like one of the most evil, disguised as an angel of light, is not the president of the United States, who is named in the Epstein files tens of thousands of times. The guy who just on a feeling decided to start bombing Iran, killing kids. That is not the person that is the most evil in politics. It's James Telerico. Ha! What's up, friends? Welcome back to the channel. Yeah, we gotta get into this video. I can't say that I enjoy doing these, but I feel like this is my cross to bear, to watch Christian nationalists say the stupidest stuff and then respond to it. And I have responded to this person many times. I even debated her on Jubilee, what was it, in September of last year. But today we're gonna be watching this video, and it's gonna be a blind react. I have not watched this all the way through. It's of Allie Stuckey, who is a Christian nationalist. And here's the thumbnail that grabbed my attention. I'm going to pull it up here. It's of James Talarico, and it says, "Satan loves this. James Talarico is more demonic than you think. Abolishing prison, transing God, and more." Wow, Allie. Wow. I wonder if she has any thumbnails like this about Trump being in the Epstein files, or the fact that her Messiah-in-Chief, who she simps for every day, is bombing children in Iran. I wonder if she has anything to say about the demonic behavior of the MAGA movement right now and how they stand on so many lies. No. Who has time for those kinds of things? Who has time to talk about how unaffordable everything in this country is because we have a megalomaniac in the office? The real problem is that Satan loves James Telerico, the guy who just won his Senate race in Texas, who I've interviewed twice on the new Evangelicals podcast, who is a kind man who wants affordable health care for his neighbors, who wants trans kids to have access to life-saving health care. That is the bridge too far for Allie Stuckey, the true Christian. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch her entire podcast on this, piece by piece. And I am going to do a slight speed up, 1.25 speed, because if not, we'll be here literally all day. And my cup of coffee is only so big. And I don't want to sit here for 5 hours and go through it painstakingly. So instead, we'll speed it up. I'm going to stop pretty often because there's a lot to say. By the way, if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Tim Whitaker. I used to be essentially a Christian nationalist. I was brought up in that world. In fact, the same theological tradition as Allie Stuckey, and I believed a lot of it. So I'm going to debunk this now on the other side as someone who is still very much a Christian. I would even argue more Christian than ever, but now helps people like you understand the logic and the nonsense and the hatred behind modern Christian nationalism. And frankly, in my personal opinion, Allie Stuckey is one of the most dangerous because she comes across so innocent and so kind, and she's really good at sugarcoating absolute poison, and it convinces a lot of people that she is a truth teller, when in reality, I have found her to be one of the biggest propagandists in the right-wing media movement. So give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment as we're going along. I would love your thoughts. Let's buckle up and get started. We got a lot to get into from the beginning. Here we go.
James Talarico is the left-wing atheist version of a good Christian. That tells you a lot about the danger of his theology, the damage of his politics, but we're going to take a deep dive into who he is, what he believes, and the denomination that shaped him on today's episode of Relatable. It's brought...
Okay, wait. Did she say the progressive Christian atheist? I have to back that up because what? All right, let's try that one more time. From the top.
James Talarico is the left-wing atheist version of a good Christian.
Left-wing atheist version of a good Christian. James Talarico is a Christian. He's getting his degree in Texas at a theological seminary. And I know that because I interviewed him in that seminary in front of a live audience with the camera crew that we brought in. So already we're lying. James Telerico is not an atheist. James Telerico is a Christian. In fact, he's quite an evangelical Christian, just more on the progressive side. And that might shock some of you, but there has been a pretty long line of more progressive evangelicals in American history. They've just been overshadowed and frankly, run out of evangelical spaces by people like Allie Stuckey. There's a book on the back of my shelf called The Other Evangelicals by Isaac Sharp. That's a good read on this.
tells you a lot about the danger of his theology, the damage of his politics, but we're going to take a deep dive into who he is, what he believes, and the denomination that shaped him on today's episode of Relatable. It's brought to you by our friends at Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com. Use code Allie to check out. That's goodranchers.com.
Do not go to goodranchers.com. Don't use her code. I'm telling you, don't do it. Oh boy. Let's see.
Hey guys, happy Monday. Welcome to Relatable. Hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. So James Talarico won his primary, but the good news is that God's eternal plan of redemption is still going off without a hitch, that nothing surprises him, even Jasmine Crockett losing her election. Nothing takes him aback. Nothing throws him off. He always knows exactly what's going to go on. He is sovereign over everything.
Okay, pause. She's talking about Calvinism here. And I'll break down what that is and how this logic or how this theology functions, but it's inherently illogical and is full of contradictions.
Sproul used to say there are no maverick molecules in all creation. Everything is in accordance to God's perfect will. And even all the craziness and the wickedness and the evil that goes on in the world, while God doesn't cause any of that, he is still completely in control.
Okay, so stop. So what she's talking about here is there is a famous theologian in these modern American Calvinist spaces named R.C. Sproul who said that essentially God is in control of every molecule. However, when you think about this, if God is in control and has sovereign reign over everything, and also she'll say in a minute here, because I did watch the beginning of this, that some people are predestined, right? So God has predestined actions that are going to come to pass. The question then becomes, well, how is God good if God's on the hook for causing or predestining what would become a lot of harmful things, right? Child death, bombing of kids in Gaza and in Iran. And then, so what happens is Allie has to say, well, God doesn't cause evil, but he still controls it. That is a distinction without a difference. If God is all powerful and in control of every single action, and his eternal plan is going off without a hitch, no matter what people do, then God is absolutely on the hook for the evil that we see today. That's just how it works. Period. But for Allie, she cannot allow that to happen. So she has to use a very classic Calvinist, talking point that, well, God is not responsible for evil, even if God is controlling evil. And then they'll say, well, he's using evil for some mysterious purpose for our good or for people's good that we will one day find out in eternity. Of course, what I would say to that is tell that to the kids who are dead in Gaza. Tell that to the parents who watch their children be blown to bits because we're dropping bombs in Iran, right? This version of God only benefits folks like Allie. And every time Allie feels like her rights in America are threatened, she speaks out. Even though by her own logic, that would be part of God's eternal plan. So the whole apparatus of her theological worldview of Calvinism, it really falls apart, but it does create this elitism where God has predestined me and my tribe for good things, and everyone else is kind of at the expense of that worldview.
He's not doing nothing about that evil. Psalm 37 reminds us that he's coming back, that his anger is kindling, that his wrath is growing, and he will avenge his people. He's not doing nothing about the wickedness and the sin and the injustice that goes on in the world. He is going to take care of it once and for all.
So what she's saying here is that all the evil that you see one day will be taken care of. Now, of course, Allie doesn't really believe this because why would you do what you do, Allie, helping to shape public policy, telling people who to vote for that shapes public policy, if you didn't really think that one day God will fix everything? Especially if you think that this God has preordained every single action that shall come to pass, not one maverick or not one rogue molecule, as you said earlier. So already we're in a land full of contradictions, and I can't wait to see this person, who, by the way, has no Bible degree, no formal educational training in theology, try and take on James Talarico, who I believe is now earning his master's in theology at the I think it's called the University of Austin, or Theological Seminary of Austin, something like that, Austin, Texas.
God of true justice. He is the source of truth. And when Jesus comes back, he won't arrive again as a meek and mild baby, but he will come as a warrior to make all things right.
So I covered this in my last video. You should go watch it. It was about dispensationalism and this idea that when God comes back, people like Allie believe that love your enemy Jesus is truly dead. Who's coming back is a smite your enemy, his cloak will be stained in blood kind of Jesus, which obviously informs her worldviews. This is why she loves Trump, because Trump is a spiteful, vengeful person who goes after his enemies. But this is actually a great window into the Jesus that she worships. Because a lot of people say, I don't get it. How do Christian nationalists like Allie not read the red letters, the teachings of Christ in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then vote for things and behave in ways that are so anti-Christ in that way? Well, that's the answer, because she believes that the Christ that she worships will one day come back and destroy his enemies, which is really code for her enemies, because in her mind, she's on the side of God. Everyone else, like me and you, are on the side of the devil.
Make all things new. So whatever angst you feel about things that are disjointed or disordered or wrong in the world, just trust that God feels much angrier and more incensed about injustice and oppression, and he is going to do something about it. And in the meantime, he has preordained that you and I, believers, that through our...
Okay, preordained, this is key. Allie believes that God has predestined some people to be truly saved, while the rest, she would say, get passed over God's grace and are left to their own devices, which is wrath and destruction and eventually hell. So Allie actually holds such an elitist worldview where she believes in the history of humankind, her and her tribe somehow hit the cosmic jackpot where the God over all things, the God who spoke into existence the entire world, who created humanity in their image, just happened to predestine Allie Stuckey and people like her for eternity, while the rest of us are damned to hell. This is a real belief. It's the acronym for this is TULIP. It's called TULIP theology. Look it up. It stands for total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints. This is the framework that she's operating in, okay? Allie does not think that God loves all people. Allie thinks that Christ only died for the elect, which of course are people like her, and somehow magically this God just happens to support every single MAGA policy that she pushes. What a coincidence. But it's important to know how the framework, it's just important to know that this is where she's coming from. This is what she believes. God is in control of everything. God's not on the hook for evil. We don't have to do a thing. God's plan will work out no matter what. Also, I'm going to make a living talking about culture war issues and politics, getting my audience all riled up at nonsense and having them ignore the predator in the White House that we all voted for, because the real threat is James Telerico, who Satan loves. Already we are off into Looney Tune land, and we haven't even gotten into the critique yet.
Obedience, which might seem silly to the world, which might seem even mundane or meaningless to us, that his will is actually accomplished through our words and through our actions. God doesn't need us. He doesn't need our prayer. He doesn't need our evangelism. He doesn't need our acts of courage.
Then why do any of this, Allie? If God doesn't need anything for his plan to go off without a hitch, why are you doing this? Why are you yapping behind a microphone about all this stuff? If it doesn't matter what you do, why do anything? Also, did you have this view when Biden was elected? Were you saying, hey guys, God has ordained that Joe Biden be elected. We have to follow his lead because this is what God has ordained. Hopefully by now, friends, you can see the insanity of this worldview. And by the way, I grew up in this. I believed it. Okay, I inhaled this theology. John MacArthur, R.C. Sproul, John Piper, even Matt Chandler. I can give you all the modern evangelical names that will shape this worldview and how deep they are in it. This is what it believes out loud.
Glorify himself or to accomplish his purpose, but in his grace and in his providence, he has chosen these things to be a means by which he does his work. And so just know this beautiful comfort that nothing in the life of a believer is wasted. There is nothing truly mundane. There is nothing truly boring or meaningless. Every single thing we do echoes in eternity. And
only for the believer, though. The reprobate, that's the other term for the people who are outside of Christ, are going to face his judgment and wrath forever and ever and ever and ever, because God deserves and needs justice. And his justice is torturing most of humanity for all of eternity. That's what we're dealing with here.
Won't be until the other side of glory that we see the fullness of the tapestry of our testimonies and how God has woven them together.
Did I not tell you that? One day when you die, you'll find out why you suffered. By the way, this logic, this framework is used to justify abuse. John Piper said famously that a woman should endure a slap or two and then go to the church if she's being abused. Why? Well, because God has ordained it. God has ordained that the woman suffer. By the way, A lot of slaveholders use this logic to justify why black people should stay enslaved. Hey, one day in glory, you'll be free. But for now, we own you. It's the same theological well that Allie's drawing upon.
Just remember, doing the next right thing in faith with excellence and for the glory of God, which we say every week on this show, it's not just about you doing the right thing. It is also about advancing God's kingdom, which is done through the mostly unseen and unsung acts of faithfulness of believers. And so we get to be a part of this grand narrative that is, because of God, always going off without a hitch. No matter what happens in an election, no matter what the political climate here is, no matter what's going on with World War III, God is completely in charge. That's what we take comfort in, and we take hope that Jesus will claim ultimate victory once and for all.
Really quick, hopefully you can see the elitist attitude here. This is the theology that millions of people in white evangelicalism believe. They are special. They are chosen. God is working all things out for their good. Everyone else, the dead kids in Iran, the dead kids in Gaza, the parents who are mourning right now overseas because of our megalomaniac president, they are just expendable. They are just a means to an end. This is not a belief that God made every human being in his or their own image. This is the belief that God is made in Allie Stuckey's image and then gets projected onto everyone else. That's what this is. It's ultimate elitism. Now, she won't say that. She would say, no, I am a sinner. I don't deserve God's grace. I don't deserve it. It's actually humbling. No, it's not. No, it's not. The fact that you believe that God has chosen you out of everyone else or most people to be saved is incredibly elitist. And by the way, this is not even, I would deeply argue, and so would most biblical scholars and theologians, that this view isn't even biblical. They pull verses way out of context, like verses in Romans 9, that are just so taken out of context to justify this nonsense. But I'm glad that she said all this in the beginning, because now we're going to go from this attitude to now critiquing another Christian, because Allie is so full of herself that she really thinks that she has the ability and power to determine who's a true follower of Christ and who isn't. Can't wait to see how she justifies this.
Part of what we have to do as Christians is be a beacon of clarity and courage in this world that is constantly rewarding cowardice and is rife with confusion and chaos. And when a person rises up who represents that confusion and chaos, but disguises it as light and truth and goodness, it is the responsibility of Christians, especially Christians with a platform, with a microphone like mine, or for pastors.
Why would someone disguise goodness or disguise evil with goodness? What does that even mean? This is so backwards. I'm assuming she's talking about James Talarico here. Go watch James Talarico speak. Go watch my interview on the New Evangelicals podcast with me and James. Everything he says is great. It's pretty common sense Christianity. But Allie can't stomach that reality, so she has to try and tell her audience that this is ultimately satanic, even if it looks good. Even she acknowledges how nice it sounds. So she has to brainwash her audience into believing that I guess God sovereignly predetermined that James Telerico would win his election, which means it's part of God's will, but also this is the work of Satan. Ugh, my head hurts already.
Out there with a pulpit like yours to ensure that we are pushing back against the confusion, because remember, Satan disguises himself as an angel of light.
There
Satan
it is.
Looks good. He sounds good. Remember that the fruit in the Garden of Eden and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it looked good. It looked like it would taste good. And remember, when Satan is trying to tempt Jesus in the wilderness, what does he use? He uses scripture. So Satan knows the Bible. He makes his lies sound scriptural, sound holy, sound good, and sound palatable to the world.
Now, there is nothing stopping us from using that logic against Allie Stuckey. Okay, all this is imaginary power grabs. Allie thinks that she has authority to call James Telerico a heretic. I think I have the authority to call Allie Stuckey a heretic, and we're just doing the Spider-Man meme. Okay, but at least I'm honest about it. Allie's a Christian. I think she's dead wrong, but she's still a Christian. Allie would not return that kind of language back to me or to James. To her, we are heretics. We are not true believers. By the way, not because we don't affirm pretty standard, widely held Christian beliefs around the virgin birth or the Trinity or the resurrection. No. It's not that. It's because we have different views on politics. We have different views on, I don't know, letting our queer neighbor have access to the rights that all of us have in America. Or that we believe reproductive choice is essential for women in this country. Because we have a different view on culture war issues that are literally, that were made up by the moral majority to drive a wedge between the right and the left, religiously. I'm not a Christian according to Allie. You're not a Christian according to Allie. Well, who cares? I don't give a shit. I'm a Christian, Allie. I don't care what you think. But wow, I mean, this is crazy. Oh, one more thing. The serpent, just FYI, the serpent story in Genesis, the out of Adam and Eve, the serpent is not Satan in that story. There is so much more going on in Genesis 1 through 3, way beyond what Allie thinks is happening. Look up the book, The Unseen World by Michael Heiser on this. Like, there's a whole other narrative happening, but the serpent is not Satan in the garden, just FYI.
And slowly but surely chips away at our conscience, chips away at our wisdom, and leads us down a literally damning path.
Sounds like her and Trump.
The person who is most prominent, that represents that best, that evil disguised as goodness, is James Talarico.
Okay, so it's not, hold on, guys. We have to be clear here. The person that Allie thinks is like one of the most evil, disguised as an angel of light, is not the president of the United States, who is named in the Epstein files tens of thousands of times. It's not the man who's been found liable by a jury of his peers for sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll. It's not the man who cheated on his wife 3 times, once with an adult film star, and paid her hush money and lied about it. It's not the guy who said, I would date my own daughter if she wasn't my daughter. No, it's not that guy. It's not the guy who lies through his teeth, who lies about this so-called stolen election, the guy who just on a feeling decided to start bombing Iran, killing kids. That is not the person that is maybe the most evil in politics. It's James Telerico. Is she serious? Is she serious? How brainwashed do you have to be to look at what this administration is doing on every level? There's waste, fraud, and abuse happening under this administration. Look up how much money Pete Hegseth spent on lobster tails in 1 month. Side note, answer, spoiler alert, $20 million in a month of our taxpayer money. No. These are not issues. These are great. We're killing people in international waters who are in boats with no due process. Not a problem. James Talarico, the man who says that we deserve affordable health care and that the billionaires are robbing us blind and that Jesus would stand for the oppressed. That's the man, Allie Stuckey. That's the man this person thinks is satanic. I should just end the video right here. Absurd. I mean, this is like, I cover Allie a lot. I've debated Allie in person. This is next level utter stupidity.
Talarico is a Texas state representative that is now the Democratic candidate for Senate in Texas. So on March 3rd, Talarico defeated Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett in the Texas Democratic primary for U.S. Senate.
That's true.
So he defeated her 52.4% to 46.2%, according
That's the most truth that she's said in this entire video so far.
To CNN. He is really the fastest growing stars, fastest rising stars, I would say, fastest growing really celebrities on the left side. He's got more than 2 million followers on Instagram and 1.6 million on TikTok. And if you look at his opponents on the Republican side, John Cornyn, Ken Paxton, they're in a runoff right now. And so we don't actually know who will be facing him in November.
Wait, pause for a second, pause. Okay, this is Ken Paxton. I had to remind myself. This is the Attorney General that I guess is in a runoff election against what might be James Telerico. He's involved in a second cheating scandal in 2 years. Ken Paxton. Allie didn't say a peep about that. That's not evil. That's not what Satan would do. No, James Telerico, guys. James Telerico is the person to watch out for, not Ken Paxton. I had to point that out. Utter ridiculousness.
Republican side, their social media footprint is much, much smaller than his. That is not necessarily an indicator of who is going to win the election, but obviously that means that Cornyn and Paxton have some work to do, especially when it comes to the younger demographics.
Not a word about Paxton.
There's an analysis of social media engagement among Democratic officials, and Talarico trailed only Kamala Harris and Barack Obama. Okay, so when it comes to social media influence, Talarico is number 3. This guy reminds me a lot of Beto O'Rourke. Remember, Beto ran for a lot of things. He ran primarily, or the race that I remember the most was against Ted Cruz. And he was literally that, like, how do you do fellow kids meme, if you know what I'm talking about, especially since his prop was actually a skateboard. We'll play you a video of that. Remember that? That was his way to relate to the kids and to relate to the voters. And Talarico kind of has the same air. He's trying to relate to the young people, but his prop, his way of relating to the youths is following OnlyFans accounts on Instagram. I'm not kidding. That was reported by the New York Post several months ago, despite this kind of like choir boy preacher Christian shtick that he has going on. It was reported in November 2025 that he was following at least 10 accounts on Instagram belonging to OnlyFans models, escorts, things like that. Just very like weird and creepy. That would have...
Guys, okay, first off, I'm not sure about you, but there are times on Instagram where someone will like a video with a blue check mark, and I'll just follow them back. I won't even look at their account. I'll just hit follow. It is very realistic that out of that these 10 accounts, James or whoever manages his account just saw maybe a blue check mark or just saw a name and thought, cool, follow. Why not? Okay, but let's say James decided to follow these accounts. You're really going to throw that up against a man who actually rapes women? You're really going to try and smear James Talarico for being weird, for following some OnlyFans accounts, when the guy that you simp for, Allie Stuckey, assaults women, is all over the Epstein files? The FBI just released a transcript that they had with a woman that they found credible who claims that Trump assaulted her when she was a child. Nothing. Ken Paxton that she mentioned, not a peep about his scandal and divorce. But whoa, James Talarico followed some OnlyFans accounts on Instagram. Oh my God, the horror. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You've got to be joking. Guys, this is why I get so fired up. How much more disingenuous can you be? Her followers are going to get behind a man who assaults women, who calls them piggy. And she's going to try and convince her audience that Talarico is dangerous because someone on his account followed some OnlyFans models? Give me a break, dude. This is ridiculous. This is so stupid.
An absolute disqualifying scandal, I think, that if you had someone who called himself a Christian preacher on the Republican right and was following those accounts, you would hear cries of hypocrisy, and rightly so. But this was just a blip on the radar for this guy. This was kind of just a
She's
feature.
a liar.
He's multifaceted.
Ken Paxton is a Christian. Okay, he's still running. I mean, I don't even want to get started. I could be here for 3 hours naming off people who claim to be Christians in the Republican Party, who have cheated on their wives, who have had threesomes, like in Liberty, the Moms for Liberty person. Which, by the way, do what you want. Okay, live and let live. I don't care about that. But when you claim to have these family values and you do this kind of stuff, where's Allie on that? Yeah, she's lying. She does not care. She doesn't care. She does not care whenever this happens on her side. John MacArthur, the famous theologian who she loves, had not one but two credible allegations of covering up child sex abuse that happened by the hands of two of his pastors. In one case, he shamed the wife, Eileen Gray, for not staying with her husband and leaving him. I'm not lying. I could call her out on this shit all day because she's a liar and she's just disingenuous and she's just not a serious person.
Personality, I guess. He also appeared on Joe Rogan in July of last year, and we'll play some of those clips. We responded to them at the time, so you can go back and kind of listen to that breakdown. But Rogan told him in that interview that he should run for president. Joe Rogan told James Talarico, this radical leftist, that he should run for president. Politico noted that Talarico took a, quote, big tent approach to his campaign by appealing to voters from both parties and independents. And an example of that is his reply to Greg Abbott just the other day after the Austin shooting last weekend, where he said dangerous people should not be allowed into the country. Okay, dangerous people should not be allowed to get guns. Texans understand this, he says to Greg Abbott. You apparently don't. Greg Abbott was responding to James Talarico, saying that this was some gun show loophole, which of course is not true. But that's actually the most moderate I've heard James Talarico, and that is his strategy there.
Really quick, Allie has made the claim that all she's trying to do is to keep bad people out of the country, aka vote for Trump's immigration policies. James Talarico essentially said what Allie claims to have believed, even though I don't think she really believes it. I think that ultimately she doesn't want brown-skinned people in the country from different parts of the world. But he said a pretty moderate thing, Allie. Why are you giving him so much crap so far? Like, isn't that wouldn't you agree? I would agree that we don't want dangerous people in the country. That seems like a pretty common sense ideal. Not good enough for her. He's still just an angel, he's still Satan disguised as an angel of light.
Democrats always moderate when they're running in these red states, but he is a radical. Just listen to what he actually believes about immigration policy.
The southern border should be like our front porch. There should be a giant welcome mat out front.
Okay, that's so out of context. That's the clip? That's the freaking clip? James Talarico does not believe that people should not be vetted. He believes that America is a country of immigrants, which it is. and that we should be welcoming of immigrants who want to make the country better, who want to give back to society, which we should. Does Allie really think, well, I guess her audience might be that gullible. Does Allie really think that we believe, like you and me believe, that we should just have no immigration process at all, that we should just get rid of any kind of barrier or any kind of checkpoint and just say, come on? No one believes that, because we understand that in our moment in history, we have nations, we have borders, we have vetting processes. The problem is that Trump, the person that Allie calls a great man who's doing great work, the work of God, is funding ICE, giving them guns, giving them masks, and they are targeting brown-skinned people just for being brown-skinned. They are targeting people just because they're refugees, even though they're here legally. They are kidnapping people. They are throwing 5-year-olds in detention centers. And these detention centers are known for horrific abuse. A 6-month-old got bronchitis in one of them, which makes me ask the question, what the hell is a 6-month-old doing in a detention center? We're not talking about if we want the border or if we want immigration to be safe. Of course we do, and we could figure it out. But this is just a ruse by the Trump administration and people like Allie to enforce racist policies. For Allie to really pull that 3-second clip and stop shows how disingenuous she is. That's shameful.
He, to his rising prominence, has been promoting a big tent version, not just of the Democrat Party, but also of Christianity. And it's big tent in some sense, in that people of all different faiths and all different backgrounds and all different moralities can be counted as Christian, according to James Talarico, especially, except for those of us who call ourselves evangelicals and actually believe the Bible to be authoritative. He is
complete straw man, not what he believes. Also, many other people in different denominations and ways of being Christian believe that the Bible has authority. It's just a matter of what kind of authority and how it's interpreted. But again, Allie doesn't understand that because she lives in the basement of Christianity. She lives in the evangelical fundamentalist basement. And in that basement, there are no windows. There's only one door. It's guarded by gatekeepers. And everyone down there believes that they have the ultimate truth that no one else has. And that's what Allie is saying here. It is so ignorant of both Christian history and the Christian reality here in America. Okay? Just to be clear, she lives in a basement and she's breathing in toxic air, and she's convinced herself that somehow she's arrived, that she has a truth that no one else has. She believes the Bible plainly. James Telerico does not. It's asinine.
A progressive seminary student. He's a former middle school teacher. He publicly supports abortion, homosexuality, and transgenderism.
All the culture war issues. See, it's not a... We'll get to that.
As we will get into.
This is if you want Allie's faith, if you want her orthodoxy, it's those 3 things. You have to be against all 3 of those to be a true Christian, which, by the way, is horseshit. These are modernist culture war issues intentionally created by the religious right to stoke fear and division of the other. Because guess what, everyone? I have a news flash to tell you. It's not the trans person who's taking away your right to affordable health care. It's not the undocumented immigrant who's taking away your wages or the job market. It's the billionaire class. It's the people that Trump stacked his cabinet with. It's Elon Musk, who will go through Doge and gut it, killing people, by the way, because of those cuts, while profiting hundreds of billions of dollars off of government contracts that we pay for. Those are the people to look out for. But Allie wants you to think that the trans person that you might never meet in real life because of how few there are, they're the reason that America has problems. And also, this is what the entire Christian tradition hinges on.
He often appeals to his progressive Christian morals, even though that's an oxymoron, and believes to defend his arguments and his policy positions, even as he criticizes conservative Christians for being Christian nationalists.
That's right.
For bringing our convictions into the public square.
Right. Well, no, your convictions are Christian nationalist convictions, Allie. We've covered this 1,000 different times. I have several books to my right here that you can look up. It's all there. That's what you are. That's what you're doing. That's not really a debate.
In similar ways, but with opposite views. And this is a tactic that has made him go viral several times in the past year and has made him very appealing to a lot of people, even moderate. So we'll go through some of those views.
Let's do that.
And we'll go into his background. What led James Talarico to the place that he is now? And what was the theological upbringing and the influence on his life that made him land on some of the wildest and most unhinged positions that you can think of? Let me pause and tell you about our first sponsor.
I just want to remind you all while I'm fast forwarding through this that, remember, she's devoted over an hour to this. Not an hour on the Epstein files, not an hour on the fact that we're killing children in Iran from Miss Pro-Life over here. No. James Talarico, who Satan loves.
Code Allie at checkout. You save an extra 10%.
Behavior.
That's 7weekscoffee.com.
Oh my
Use code
gosh.
Allie at checkout. That's 7weekscoffee.com.
Ridiculous.
In 2021, Talarico put God into radical transgender ideology in his support for laws that would allow kids to be mutilated on the Texas House floor. Here's that one.
Let's see.
The first two lines of the Bible, the first two lines in Genesis, use two different Hebrew words to describe God. One is the masculine Hebrew noun for divinity. The second is the feminine Hebrew noun for spirit. God is both masculine and feminine and everything in between. God is non-binary.
That is true. Guys, I don't want to be this crude, but does anyone want to ask Allie, what genitalia does God have? Does God have a penis? Does God have a vagina, Allie? You know, does Allie, who claims to know the Bible, know that God is represented both as a mother hen or a nursing mother and also in the masculine as well? That it goes both ways? Does she know that apparently, according to James, there's two different Hebrew words in the first two verses of Genesis that describe both feminine and masculine traits? Which makes sense, by the way. If all of humanity is made in God's image, that means that God must have both masculine and feminine traits that we're made in the image of. And then, of course, how do you define that? Well, culture sets those parameters, right? I mean, back in the day, in American history, as far as I know, the color blue was seen mostly as a girl's color, and the color pink was seen as a man's color. Today, that's kind of the opposite, right? Girls like pink things. Okay, well, that's a made-up cultural norm. Doesn't mean that you're less or more masculine or feminine because you like pink or not. We just put that label on people. God is non-binary. God is spirit. God does not have a body. And if you say, well, Christ had a body, I agree. But as far as we can tell, Christ isn't here. Okay? And again, God, image of God, male and female, feminine, masculine. This is not that radical at all.
So it's actually true that God is not male or female like we are. He doesn't have a body like we do.
That.
And yet this statement is inaccurate because God consistently refers to himself as Father, as King, as Lord, in masculine terms.
And also as a mother hen and as a nursing mother.
If you go down further into Genesis 1:27, it's very clear that regardless of what you think about the masculine features or the feminine features of God the Father, what is clear is that he made us male and female. There are not multiple words there used for male and female. In fact, we read that God made man in his image, male and female, he created them. So he didn't say male, female, and non-binary, that he made multiple forms of chromosomal combinations that you can have besides XX.
Okay, time out. I mean, again, this is just utter stupidity. If we're going, first off, Allie believes that Genesis 1 is a literal telling of how the earth was made. So if we're using her own fundamentalist, nonsensical biblical interpretation here, because that's not what's going on in Genesis 1, when God made the moon and the stars, did he also make, dawn and dusk? When does sunrise start and sunset begin, Allie? We have other terms for the in-between, dawn and dusk. When things start to set, they start to transition from daytime to nighttime. We have swamps, not just oceans and dry land, right? We have things that are mixed. Just because it's not explicitly stated doesn't mean it can't exist. And by the way, some people don't have those kinds of chromosomes. Some people don't have XX or XY. There are genetic anomalies. Anomalies. There we go. Anomalies. Whew. It's going to be a long one, guys. Look, I'm going to keep that in. That's just real talk right there, okay? But you get my point, okay? There are people who do not fit the male and female category. Did God make a mistake with them? No, of course not. God, why is this a big deal?
XY, he created us male and female. So we see Talarico, this theme over and over again, that he really uses God as a mascot, as a means to advance his political ends.
Okay, first off, that's ridiculous. I mean, pot, meat, kettle. Number two, like I said, friends, okay, if God only made male and female, in Allie's terminology, XXXY, then God has made mistakes with people who don't have those chromosomes. And therefore, but I thought God is fully in control and sovereign, and every action that comes to pass is his sovereign will.
Not submit to God.
So which is it? Like, are these mistakes that God made? Are these part of God's sovereign plan? I'm just asking. I have to know. I mean, we have a term, right? Intersex. These are intersex people. They exist. So stupid. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. Okay, let's keep going. Jeez.
Is the ruler and the authority over the universe. If he actually believed what Genesis 1:1 says, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then he would see, if he's creator, then he's also the ruler over all of it. Then he's the definer of all things. He's the arbiter of truth, the determinant of morality, and he alone has the right and responsibility to be the decider of all things, the definer of all things. He and he alone gets to say what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false, what a woman is, what she's not, when life begins, why it matters, to define the parameters of holy sexuality.
Okay, I just want to be clear about this. Everything she said, you cannot get from the Bible directly. It's impossible. You have to read the Bible, then interpret it in a specific way to come to that conclusion. The Bible does not talk about when life begins. And by the way, in Genesis 2, it says that God breathed into Adam the breath of life. Many people in the Jewish tradition, because of that, believe that life starts when the baby is born, at first breath. In Exodus 21, there's a distinguishment between a fetus, if it gets harmed, versus if the mother gets harmed, and the penalty for that. The Bible has many examples of polygamy and abuse that is normalized. Lamech in Genesis 4 takes 2 wives. The Bible does not condemn that. David is given multiple wives by God. God says it in the text. I gave you these wives and I would have given you more. So this is just so disingenuous, because if these things were true, if God, right, had this objective moral truth, what she's saying is that only her and her tribe know what that is. Every other religious tradition is just dead wrong. Every other Christian who interprets the Bible differently than she does is dead wrong. She is just reading the text plainly while everyone else is making up their own theology. This is the same person, by the way, who will ignore the countless teachings in the scripture about how we are to treat the foreigner, how we are to treat the widow, the poor, the oppressed as a society. In the Hebrew Bible, one of the biggest reasons God judges the Israelites is because they neglect the oppressed. They neglect the poor. Allie will explain those away. That's prescriptive or that's descriptive. Yeah, it doesn't really count. That's not what we're talking about. That's a hard issue. Do not take this person seriously as a Bible theologian or expert. She is not. She is a fundamentalist Christian, and they have a very specific way to interpret the Bible that always benefits them. Hard stop. How else do you think she can read James 5, which says, "Woe to you rich business owners who exploit your workers. Judgment's coming to you." How do you think she reads that, then votes for Trump, the man who has a legacy of exploiting his workers? Because she has a selective interpretation that allows her to justify that while condemn James Telerico for rightly deciphering Genesis 1 and making the astute point that Allie even agrees with, that God does not have a gender. God is non-binary. Fact check true. What's the problem?
To decide what marriage is. But of course, he doesn't submit to God as the creator and the ruler of all things. He sees God as a political pawn. Also, James Talarico decided to turn a sermon at a local church, St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church around Austin, around Round Rock, into some kind of political stump speech about transgenderism and abortion. Saw too.
This summer, more than half our population became second-class citizens. Every one of our neighbors with a uterus became the property of the state. And nothing is more unchristian than that. I want to acknowledge that our trans community needs abortion care too. Defending trans Texans is something we have to do every day at the state capitol. And you better believe I'll be giving sermons on that too. So when I use the word woman, it should not be understood as an exhaustive term, but rather as a lens through which to understand, examine, and interrogate patriarchy.
So right there.
By the way, correct. Texas has a really strict abortion ban. Infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates have risen. Women have bled out in hospital waiting rooms because of this law. Don't let Allie gaslight you into thinking that what James said is somehow radical or crazy. It's not. Allie is the radical one. Allie is the extremist. Allie is the one who partnered with folks like Turning Point USA, which is involved in church work all the time. The first place that Trump spoke at after he became a convicted felon was a mega church in Arizona. It was Dream City Church. Don't let Allie paint this picture that somehow James Telerico is wild. That's a very moderate position to hold. Our trans neighbors should be able to access health care, and women should be able to have reproductive freedom in the state of Texas. That's not radical.
He gives us 3 positions that a Democrat of even 10 years ago would not have dared to represent publicly. One, that it's normal and even moral to switch sexes, that it's possible to actually switch sexes.
Not sex is gender. Sex and gender are different. Ignore that.
And that it is important that people who do switch sexes, especially people who identify as so-called trans men, are able to have the taxpayer-funded right to kill their baby inside the womb. And then the other position.
Not killing a baby inside the womb. I reject that framing.
This nexus is so important that it needs to be represented publicly at a church. And also, this cumbersome language of people with uteruses really reduces what a woman is into her just biological capacity.
Actually, that's what you're doing, Allie, because you asked the question, what is a woman? So what is it? What is a woman? Is it someone with a uterus? What happens when someone has their uterus removed? Is it someone who can give birth? What happens if they're barren? Actually, it's Allie who reduces womanhood to biological, statements, who reduces womanhood to biological or to certain patriarchal norms that they are to submit to their husband. And again, I want to be clear. This has nothing to do with Allie's life. The fact that a trans person can get access to health care, which, by the way, we know statistically gender-affirming care reduces the risk of suicidal ideation in the trans community, right? Because we know that it actually is a good thing. But for Allie, because of her horrible interpretation of the Bible, she has to put that limitation not on her, but on her neighbor as well. Allie, who cares? Who cares? What does it cost you if someone else gets access to life-saving health care? Why are you obsessed with this? Why? Because you need to scapegoat minority groups to cast blame on as the problem with America. It's not the billionaires. It's not Trump. It's not the megalomaniacs that you voted for. It's not the abusers that you voted for, right? It's not the people running our country. Don't forget, guys, Republicans own they own Congress, the Oval Office, and the Supreme Court. And somehow James Talarico is the threat because he believes in gender-affirming care and reproductive rights, which the SBC also believed in the 70s and 80s, the Southern Baptist Convention. Give me a break.
Into her reproductive organs, which is the exact opposite of what progressives say that they're doing. So who is James Talarico? How did this person with all of these kooky beliefs rise to such prominence? He was first elected as a Texas House representative in 2018 after he defeated Republican Cynthia Flores. And he rose to prominence a couple of years ago when he went viral for his videos of speeches on the Texas House floor opposing the legislation to display the 10 Commandments in Texas classrooms. Stop for it.
Great.
Forcing our religion onto Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, and atheist students is not love. Forcing teachers to put up a poster in their classrooms against their wills is not love.
Right.
Love does no harm to a neighbor.
Okay, I bet he would argue, though, that Christian teachers could be forced to call a child by the wrong preferred pronouns or could be forced to teach things about the acceptance of LGBTQ ideology.
Yeah, but here's the distinction, Allie. One gives birth to life and one violates separation of church and state. We have a First Amendment that says Congress shall make no law, either promoting or hindering a religion. Putting the 10 Commandments in public schools, a government entity, violates that First Amendment. Calling a child by their gender or by their name that we know also helps reduce their risk of unaliving themselves is life-giving. And by the way, incredibly rare. I need to really emphasize this. It is so incredibly rare to meet a trans child. It's rare. It is so, it's like the number of people under 18 who are even considering puberty blockers. The stat I read was like, it's 0.0013% of the population. It's so fringe. But instead we have to talk about this stuff. Yes, Allie's the same person who would use this logic if she was alive back, or if she was doing this work back in the day, to say, why do I have to allow black people to go to school with my white kid when my religious tradition teaches that they should stay separate? They're infringing on my right. Your right to what? To discriminate? If you're going to teach school, you should be able, or you should be teaching people about the reality that some people exist differently in the world than other people. If you don't like that, that's your own problem. Period. This is not crazy. This is not rocket science. This is the same rhetoric that segregationists use to fight school integration. Same stuff. Our religious rights, or our religious beliefs, deeply held convictions, determine or insist that we will not allow integration to happen. And as a teacher who believes that, you're now forcing me to violate my own religious conviction. That's the logic. But you see how that conviction harms? It's BS.
Even though it opposes their worldview. And he says this is forcing religion upon people who don't believe in Christianity. But of course, that's not true. Displaying the 10 Commandments is about American history. You actually cannot understand Western civilization. You can't understand America without understanding Christianity, without knowing the Bible, without understanding the 10 Commandments. So even
delusion. None of that's true. And by the way, putting the 10 Commandments up in a classroom permanently is different than teaching people about it as part of world history. I'm not aware of anyone who's saying that in a world history class you can't learn about the 10 Commandments. We're talking about posting them permanently in classrooms because that's part of our quote-unquote heritage. It's not. It's not. Many of the founding fathers were deists. And again, guys, let's just use our rational faculties here. If the founding fathers who wrote our Constitution wanted us to be an explicitly Christian nation, especially in the way that Allie thinks about it, wouldn't that be all over the Constitution? Wouldn't you have it so clearly spelled out? And instead, you have the opposite. You have clauses that say there shall be no religious test given in order to hold office. It's the opposite of what Allie is saying. Even if some of the founders were Christian, they obviously wanted a secular government that had a gap between the church and the state for both sides. For both sides. That's why Allie has a right to believe these horrible things. Allie is not being forced to marry gay people. Pastors that she likes are not being forced to participate in that part of society. All people are saying is these folks have a right to exist. And for Allie, that is a bridge too far. The fact that children might be taught that gay people exist is somehow indoctrination. No, it's ignoring reality. That's the indoctrination. That's the basement Allie lives in. It's dark, it's selective, and only certain people can teach kids about the real world, which is just a load of BS. To indoctrinate children into a worldview, by the way, that crumbles. Ask me how I know. Ask me how I know how this worldview crumbles at some point, unless you stick your head so far in the sand, you just choose to ignore science and reality and goodness and beauty and truth.
Just from a literary or historical educational perspective, displaying the 10 Commandments, I think, is really foundational in understanding the country that we live in. But also, they're just good rules for life. And it's really hard, I think, from a moral perspective, to argue against them. Talarico is a lifelong professing Christian, and he often cites his grandfather as a major influence. His grandfather was a Baptist preacher who taught him Jesus' greatest command, he says, is to love God and love your neighbor. Sub 5.
My granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas. And when I was little, he told me that Christianity is a simple religion. Not an easy religion, he would always clarify, but a simple religion because Jesus gave us 2 commandments, love God and love neighbor. And there was no exception to that second commandment. Love thy neighbor regardless of race or gender or sexual orientation or immigration status or religious affiliation. And it's why I have fought so hard for the separation of church and state in the state capitol in Texas.
Really quick, before she answers that, let me just say, that's great because the Bible does say that. Love your neighbor as yourself. How would you want your neighbor to love you? Right? Allie wants her neighbors to allow her to practice her religion in freedom, to not be discriminated against, right? So do the same for the other. And by the way, in one of the passages where Jesus says that, one of the religious leaders says, well, who's my neighbor? Because that's the question, right? Well, who does this apply to? And Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And the short, truncated version is that Samaritans in that context were greatly despised among the Jewish people and vice versa. And Jesus tells this story about a good Samaritan to a Jewish audience. This idea that the other, the person who's less than, the person who's kicked out of the tribe, is actually the good person in the story, while the religious elite of his time were not. And his point is that that's who your neighbor is. It's the person that you don't like. It's the person that you think isn't like you. So Jesus is actually pretty clear. And again, by Allie's own standard, right, the Bible's clear on this stuff. The Bible is the source for how Christians ought to live. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's pretty clear. Let's see how Allie twists this one.
Obviously, it is true that the greatest commandments are to love God and love your neighbor. How do we obey God? We obey God by keeping his commandments. And we love others by defining love how God defines love. 1 John 4:8, God is love. So love isn't affirming sin. Love isn't telling someone they could be born in the wrong body. Love isn't refusing to show people the truth in the 10 Commandments or refusing to preach the gospel to people.
Notice the gymnastics this person has to do. Love isn't affirming sin. Allie, who do you vote for? Who do you support blindly? The policies that you cheer on are sinful. They create chaos on earth. That's the theme. Sin is a chaotic force that brings hell on earth to our neighbors. Allie votes for these policies and cheers them on. In fact, she even tweeted when there was a recent boat strike from our government, when we killed people in international waters, no due process, we just sniped them. Allie said in a tweet, I can't tell you how much I voted for this. That is evil. But again, when your worldview, when your theology is, I've been predestined to be saved and that God's orchestrating everything for my purpose one day, right? Those people in those boats they're expendable. They're not truly human. By the way, 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast. Does that sound like, does Trump embody any of that? Does the MAGA movement embody those things? It keeps no record of wrong, it doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. Now, Allie would say, well, the truth is that trans people don't exist. And I would say, no, you're delusional. The reality is that trans people absolutely do exist, and they deserve the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as American citizens. It doesn't matter for Allie. They're not real Americans. Guys, I hope I'm not belaboring the point. I hope that you see what I'm seeing here. I'm trying to untangle the web, the knots that this person weaves for her audience and to show you how batshit crazy it is, how hateful it ultimately is. This is pure venom, and it's always aimed at specific people. Always. People who are not like her.
Love is walking and speaking in agreement with God because we can't outlove God. We can't outcompassion him. So the most loving thing we can do with our lives, with our words, is agree with God.
Great, Allie. What the hell does that mean? For Allie's world, it means whatever I say. That's what it comes down to. Whatever she says, that's God and what God loves or hates.
Now, Talarico is still a member of his childhood congregation. It's a very progressive church in Austin, St. Andrew Presbyterian Church. And it shouldn't be surprising at all that in the About Us page of this church, it says, we are Christ-centered, yet it's never good when you see a church saying we are Christ-centered, but we respect and learn from all religions of love. Well, again, that's just not a Christian position. If
yes,
God is love and we believe in the triune God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that no other religion believes in, then he is actually the only source of love. There aren't other religions of love. And
you can absolutely learn from other world religions about love. Absolutely can. If God is over all things and God created everything and everyone and God predetermined everything by Allie's logic, then God predetermined other religious traditions. Certainly God is in some of them. Certainly God is big enough and not this tiny little puny God who only exists in Allie's little basement of evangelical Christianity. Certainly, if God is the creator of all things and all people in all time and all history, does Allie recognize that there are hundreds of different religious traditions? Hundreds. Thousands, tens of thousands. And today there are three major world religions that all, by the way, come out of the Abrahamic faith. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are cousins. Muslims revere Jesus greatly. They revere Mary greatly. Now, of course, there's some major differences theologically, but don't misunderstand. We could absolutely learn something from our Muslim neighbors, from our Jewish neighbors, and of course from our Christian neighbors and other people. Love is not exclusive to Allie, and if it is, we're screwed. Because look at what her expression of love advocates for. It advocates for a world where men who abuse women and allegedly children become president and are being used by God for some amazing purpose as everything around us crumbles and is dropped into chaos as ICE agents run through our streets completely unaccountable. I really think, I mean, I don't know, guys. Like the level of delusion truly is unhinged on this one. It's unhinged. I don't know what she's thinking. It is crazy.
Into Christianity. So it doesn't come as a surprise that he is essentially, Talarico is essentially a universalist who claims to be a Christian and uses some Christian tenets, but actually doesn't believe in the exclusivity of Christ.
By the way, many people who are Christian believe in the idea of universal reconciliation. Okay? This is a Christian tradition. There are many people in the Christian tradition who have believed this. There's a whole theology around it. These questions can be answered. Maybe that's what's so frustrating here, is that the questions that Allie is posing has some pretty compelling answers, but she won't introduce her audience to those ways of thinking. She's going to keep them in that basement of fundamentalism, right? She has to keep that door above ground closed, tell her audience that everything above ground is a desert wasteland full of evil people, and that her and her tribe are the only arbiters of truth and God's moral law and how the world's supposed to function. Read works by David Bentley Hart, who's an Eastern Orthodox theologian. He has a great book on universal reconciliation. Maybe God is bigger, Allie, than your tiny little corner of a very damp and dirty basement that preaches hatred for everyone who's not like you. And she'll say, no, it's love. No, if your love causes harm like that, if your love causes people to be more depressed, to be more at odds with themselves, if your idea of love votes for policies that are killing our neighbors, that's hate.
To that in just a second. Let me pause, tell you about our next sponsor.
No, I'll tell you what to do. Check out some of my merch. If you're enjoying this video, guys, please consider checking out my merch or becoming a member of the channel. I do this work as an independent creator, and so I am reliant on people like you and your generosity. Thank you so much for supporting me in this work. Hopefully you enjoy these kinds of videos. Make sure to like it, give it a subscribe, to the channel. I'm trying to hit 70,000 subs. That's the next big milestone, and leave a comment. Comments, I love reading them. It really helps me know how you guys are thinking, what you think about videos like this. I appreciate it.
The New York Times, where he essentially says all religions are true. Sot 6.
I believe Christianity points to the truth. I also think other religions of love point to the same truth. I think of different religious traditions as different languages. So you and I could sit here and debate what to call this cup, and you could call it a cup in English, you could call it something else in Spanish and French, but we are all talking about the same reality. I believe Jesus Christ reveals that reality to us, but I also think that other traditions reveal that reality in their own ways with their own symbol structures. And I've learned more about my tradition by learning more about Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and Judaism. And so I see these beautiful faith traditions as circling the same truth about the universe, about the cosmos.
Well, there's certainly nothing beautiful about Islam, that is for sure. We can see the fruit of Islam.
Screw off, Allie. Just screw off. You can see
throughout the world, which stands for everything that Talarico claims to stand against: the oppression of women and children, violence. Certainly there is gross wealth disparities that are actually pushed forward by tyrannical policy.
Has she looked around America? Guys, again, like this is the insanity of Allie's worldview. This is how stupid her worldview is. I mean that literally, right? Obviously, any religious tradition can experience really fundamentalist sects of that tradition. Like, for example, in Allie Stuckey's world, John MacArthur, who protected 2 men on his staff who abused their own children, right? Or Doug Wilson, in his world, he married off a known child abuser to a woman in his church, who then reoffended with his own infant. The Southern Baptist Convention had a huge scandal where it turned out they were hiding decades of abuse. Okay, we can easily point to examples inside of Allie's Christian tradition. I can also point to examples in the Catholic tradition. I can point to examples in Judaism. You can point to examples in any other world religion, because where people are, bad things can happen. Okay, no one's debating that there are expressions of Islam in the world that are really unhealthy and dangerous, sure. But to paint an entire religion like that is so disingenuous. She won't give people the same respect that she demands from her opponents. And the wealth disparity, we live in the richest country on earth, and people are drowning in medical debt. People are afraid to call for an ambulance lest they go bankrupt. And the person that she voted for has enriched himself by this at the tune of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. He sued the federal government for $10 billion. You're telling me that we don't have a problem with the wealth gap in America? You've got to be up your own butt. So far, you can't see anything. Jesus Christ, Allie. I mean, this is 101. Even Republicans admit that the wealth gap has exploded since Reagan. that people are not able to make ends meet working 1, 2, 3 different jobs in this country. And you have the caucasity to critique some other country that we're not even a part of and make up some kind of myth about their wealth disparity? How about take care of your own house first, Allie? What about America first? Jeez.
In places where Islamic regimes are in charge. And then, I mean, the obvious truth is that you can be someone who believes those things, but you can't be a Christian and believe that all religions kind of point to the same truth.
Yes, you
because
can.
in John 14:6, the Jesus that James Talarico claims to follow says, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Sure. And one thing we could say is that if Jesus is God, Jesus can reach people in their own tongue, in their own culture, in their own religious tradition. It's plausible. I'm not saying you have to agree with it, but certainly people can interpret this text this way. If Jesus is God and is everywhere, certainly this Jesus can reach people in their own tradition, in their own language, in their own cultural and historical moment. Sure. They don't need an English Protestant Bible, and they don't need to convert to white evangelical fundamentalism via Calvinism to believe in Christ. It's so crazy.
Except through me. He is affiliated with the fully affirming Presbyterian Church of the United States of America. So this is PCUSA. There's PCUSA, which is liberal, and we'll get into that in a second. And then there's PCA, that is a collection of churches within Presbyterianism that are more theologically conservative or theologically faithful. His church is also part of what's called the Reproductive Freedom Congregations. This is a Texas movement to remove abortion's stigma. The church also celebrates transgenderism. We played you that clip earlier.
By the way, so far, guys, we are what? How many minutes in are we? Okay, we're almost halfway. So far, what's the big controversy? James is pro-choice, believes that trans people deserve health care, and thinks that queer people can be loved by God and that other religious traditions can have truth in them. That's what this is boiled down to so far. This is Allie's expose that apparently Satan loves. This is the controversy we're talking about here. While she just completely glosses over the actual abuse and the hatred and the venom and the lies espoused by her political tradition. I almost don't have the words to match the emotions I'm feeling about my utter disdain for how she's doing this and what she's doing. And by the way, she's one of many. Any right-wing media Christian like this, Josh Howerton, there's other influencers, are so outraged at James Telerico. The same people who are telling you that God has set us up where a man who's all over the Epstein files and who is BFF with the pedophile and who has has credible allegations against him of assaulting a child. That's who God is using. So don't worry about those controversies. Be outraged about James Talarico, a potential senator. Potential. How much more upside down do you need to see this world as? Do you understand now why so many of us left this basement? Because when you start thinking critically and start putting 2 and 2 together, it doesn't add up. The math ain't mathing.
Where he's at his church saying trans communities need abortion care, neighbors with uteruses.
Move on. What's next?
Talarico has a year of classwork left before he receives his MDiv from Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Obviously a very progressive institution. He's studying to be a pastor, but he says, of course, his studies are on hold because he believes that this is where God has called him right now. He said this in a New Yorker article from February. We'll get more into the history of Presbyterianism in a second and how this kind of shaped his ascendance and shaped his theology. First, I want to dive in a little bit to that New Yorker article. So the New Yorker published a profile of Talarico on February 23rd titled James Talarico Puts His Faith in Texas Voters. This is an excerpt where Talarico was in a room with former Dallas Mayor Mike Rawlings and First Presbyterian Church of Dallas senior pastor Amos DeSalsa. DeSalsa asked Talarico, what kind of welcome are you getting from evangelicals? The reason he's asking this is because 90% of white evangelicals voted for President Trump in 2024. And Talarico said,
first off, it's 80%, not 90%. But also, doesn't that tell you something, Allie? Voted for a abuser. I'm not using the R word because of YouTube. It gets real wacky with that. But you know what word I'm saying, right? Rhymes with grape. Allie can just gloss over the fact that 80% of her tribe voted for one of the most immoral men ever to exist and have the Oval Office in the presidency. Corrupt beyond all measure on every level. Financial, moral, political, economical, right? We're just bombing countries for the hell of it because he had a feeling. Glossed over. I will never get over that.
You know, we think that we can make headway with Christians, evangelicals, and he shrugged. He's distinguishing here between Christians, who he believes are Christians, and evangelicals. What he's doing is insinuating that evangelicals are a lost cause because evangelicals won't vote for him.
Well, that's, first off, two things are true here. That's right. They won't vote for him. Case in point, Allie's hour-long freaking expose on James Talarico and all the other right-wing Christian, influencers and creators who are going after this dude. So point is kind of proven. Number two, I love how Allie doesn't like it when James distinguishes between evangelical and Christian when she's the person who does that all the time when it comes to progressive Christians and Christianity, right? Again, it's always rules for thee and not for me in this worldview.
Talarico said in an interview last year, there are a lot of people who feel that the Democratic Party in recent years has been hostile to people of faith.
Yeah.
Talking about faith, he added, this creates an opportunity for connection. I don't think it automatically wins you over, but it starts a conversation. So we can see here what his goals are. His goals are to appeal to Christians. Most Christians, no matter your denomination, do vote Republican.
That's not true. Okay, this is actually a very telltale sign of Allie's own bias and racism. The black church overwhelmingly votes Democrat. Mainline Protestants are about half and half. 55% voted for Trump, I think, in the last election. But there are other faith traditions, in particular the black Christians, broadly speaking, who vote Democrat consistently. But for Allie, those people don't count. And by the way, that's an issue in white progressive spaces as well. In fact, David French, who's really a moderate, wrote an article about how James Telerico is one of the few politicians who's a Christian. And Jamar Tisby, who's a friend of mine, also an historian, was like, dude, you're erasing the dozens of black Christians who are in politics right now who have been doing this work for years, way before Talarico came on the scene. So there's even a blind spot to white progressives as well when it comes to the black church. They consistently get overlooked in this conversation. And I refuse to let Allie overlook that population and demographic because they absolutely matter. They absolutely are Christians, whether she likes it or not.
It gets more and more Republican the deeper you get into Christianity, with white evangelicals being the stronghold for conservatism.
Okay, you see the slight there? The more Christian you get, aka the more like Allie you get, the more of a real Christian you are, the more Republican you get. She essentially is saying the quiet part out loud, that our politics and our theology are wedded together. They are one and the same. And the more right you become, the more Christian you become. The more like me you become theologically, the more Christian you are. It's ridiculous.
Also lead the way in church attendance, lead the way and reading their Bible every day, lead the way and making donations. And it really does, like, as a white evangelical, the reason for this, the reason that we have the most conservative, I would say, biblical position on issues like marriage, sex, sexuality, even things like immigration, it really does go back to our love for the Bible.
Allie, actually, if you actually gave a shit about the Bible and what it says, especially as a theme, you'd be welcoming the immigrant, not kidnapping the immigrant. Allie doesn't read the Bible. Allie interprets the Bible through a fundamentalist lens. She ignores so much of it, which, by the way, let me just say, to be fair, all of us are interpreting the Bible through different lenses. I make no bones about that, right? The Bible is a big, complicated collection of ancient texts. We have none of the original manuscripts. There are all kinds of translations. There have been edits. A council put certain books together. It's a long, complicated history of how we got our modern Protestant Bible. And that Bible is different than the Catholic Bible. And that Bible is different than the Eastern Orthodox Bible. Then you have all other kinds of sects. You have Russian Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox. It's a whole world of biblical literature, and then how one is to interpret it. So to be clear, what Allie is actually doing is she's interpreting the English Protestant Bible a very specific way that gives her outcomes that benefit herself no matter what. Okay? That's what she's doing. I admit that I guess for sake of argument and for lack of a better term, as a progressive Christian, I'm also interpreting the Bible. But I do believe that the themes throughout Scripture are more consistent with the idea of God's blessing consistently expanding outward, including more and more people, right? I believe in the notions that we see consistently of a God who not only fights for the oppressed, but takes on the flesh of an oppressed person. Right? Jesus, who Christians believe was God in the flesh, is born as an innocent baby into a feeding trough, into a manger, into a poor family, and is raised probably lower class, and is then killed on a cross via a criminal's execution. Jesus not only advocated for the oppressed and said that he came to liberate the oppressed, that's a physical statement, by the way, not just some spiritual reality, but also he was an oppressed person. So again, like I don't want to be disingenuous here. I understand that I'm also interpreting the Bible, but my interpretive lens is always aiming for a more just society. Allie's lens consistently puts her and her tribe at an advantage and disparages everyone else underneath of it. Everyone. If you are Muslim, you're evil. If you're Hindu, you're lost. If you're gay, you're sinful. If you're trans, you're evil. If you're an immigrant, go back to your country. There's no sense of love for one's neighbor broadly. It is love for oneself at the expense of one's neighbor. That's what Allie ultimately believes. That's what her actions show. Doesn't matter what her words say. The actions that she shows, the policies that she supports, do those things.
Our belief in the importance of solid theology, the further you get away from that, the more liberal you're going to become.
That is sorry, I know I'm pausing so much, guys. I know. But this is why I told you to buckle up. That is bullshit. There's a reason why evangelicals are not part of the broad academic scholarship, biblical scholarship conversation. Biblical critical scholars who treat the text with such reverence, they're trying to understand it on its own terms. There's a reason evangelicals are not part of that conversation, broadly speaking. There's a reason white evangelicals built their own institutions and indoctrinate their people in their own form of apologetics and weird biblical, literacy. There's a reason, because it's widely discredited, widely. She lives in a bubble. It's a cult, frankly. It's a bubble of absolute truth that we have access to and no one else does.
Look at Pew Research, for example. Evangelical Christians have higher church attendance rates, around 60%, than other Christian groups, with the exception of Mormons. Mormons, 76%. But the reason we don't include Mormons when we're talking about denominations of Christianity is because it's not a denomination of Christianity. It's something else. 63% of evangelicals read the Bible outside of religious services, at least weekly, while 30% of Protestants, so those are mainline Protestants, 29% of Orthodox Christians, and 25% of Catholics do.
By the way, I just want to point this out. Part of this is because evangelical Protestants have a very big emphasis on personal devotions and reading the Bible for yourself. That's not a framework that Catholic or Orthodox Christians, as far as I'm aware, really have. It's not part of the culture. And that's because of how they were built. Essentially, the Catholic Church interprets the scripture for its congregants, while Protestants believe that every person should interpret the Bible for themselves, hence why they have thousands of different denominations all arguing over what the Bible says. Okay, so this is true, but there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it.
And then you look at the fruit of that. Evangelicals, white evangelicals, are far more likely than any other Christian group to believe that abortion should be illegal. So
that's odd, because the Bible never says that. Don't know what Bible you're reading, Allie. Never says abortion should be illegal. Abortion is not murder in the Bible. And by the way, if it is, then God is a murderer, because God allows the killing of infants in the Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, God commands entire genocides of people, including the children. So again, it's in the Bible that you claim to be reading. It's in there.
Example, 73% of white evangelicals believe that abortion should be illegal in all or most cases, versus white non-evangelical Protestant, so the James Talarico, 33% believe that. Black Protestant, 26%. Catholic, only 40%. And then the religiously unaffiliated, the people who love James Talarico most, only 13% of them believe that abortion should be illegal in all or most cases. So these are the people that aren't going to get on board with Talarico, that he basically is saying is a lost cause, we evangelicals, because we are so staunch in our biblical beliefs, and we are so staunch in our views on abortion and gender and immigration and things like that. So I'm not...
Because you're foolish, not because you're biblical. If you actually read the Bible, you would not have these views, especially if you claim that only the Bible informed these views. Jesus never talks about gay marriage, ever, ever. He never mentions abortion, ever. The Apostle Paul never talks about these issues, ever. Unless you're interpreting in a really weird and fundamentalist way.
worried about our crowd. I am worried about those in the white, non-evangelical Protestant world who might be conservative if it weren't for this deadly dose of toxic empathy that they are imbibing every day, this propaganda that makes them think that loving your neighbor means opening the border, or loving your neighbor means affirming someone's so-called gender identity.
She is obsessed with someone. She's obsessed with genitals. Allie is obsessed with other people's genitals. She will not stop yapping about transgender people. Who gives a crap, Allie? It doesn't matter. Let them live. It only matters if you try and stop them from accessing healthcare. They have a right to exist. They're human beings, for God's sake. And again, no one that I'm aware of is advocating for open borders. In fact, your boy Trump tanked Joe Biden's bipartisan bill when he was president to strengthen the border. Give me a break. Give me a break. And the data that we do have suggests that undocumented immigrants are half as likely to commit crime as native-born counterparts. You're obsessed with like 3 freaking issues that the Bible barely even mentions, and when it does is in the affirmative. Welcome the immigrant, welcome the stranger, welcome the foreigner. Why do I torture myself with this nonsense?
Or that it's loving to women to legalize aborting their children because they might have a hard life.
Not children. I'm going to call it out every time, friends, because we allow this to go unanswered too often. A fetus is not a child. Okay? Most abortions happen at 6 weeks. There's no brain. There's nothing going. It's in the very beginning. And by the way, if Allie really wanted to reduce abortion rates, she would advocate for access to free contraceptives, for comprehensive sex education, for livable wages, for paid family and maternal leave, because we know that these factors go into someone's decision if they will terminate a pregnancy or not. But Allie doesn't want those things because that's socialism. Allie wants a world where women cannot get access to the health care that they might need, which includes, by the way, if you have fetal demise, which includes, by the way, if you're in the 3rd trimester, something goes horribly wrong, but the baby still technically has a heartbeat, you can't get access to the health care that you need by getting an abortion. A tragic one, by the way, because let me ask you this question, guys, because you hear this all the time, right? Oh, the left wants to kill babies up until the point of birth. What person is pregnant, gets to month 8, has the nursery done, the baby shower's all completed, and goes, you know what? I changed my mind. Month 8, let's abort. No, something goes terribly wrong. That's why they're so rare. 3rd trimester abortions, I think, are like 0.6 or 1% of all abortions nationwide. They are so infrequent. They are so rare. And when they happen, they are a tragedy. They're a tragedy. But we need to have access to those things in case something goes horribly wrong. This is the opposite. Allie is the opposite of love. She's the opposite of empathy. After all, it's toxic. This is what happens when you think empathy is toxic. You advocate for the most cruel positions imaginable.
Otherwise, those are the people, for you and for me, that we have to work really hard at channeling their compassion in the right direction. And most importantly, helping them see factual truth, political truth, and biblical truth. Those are the people that we're really going to be fighting over when it comes to James Talarico. That will be true in the next presidential election too. They believe that there is a portion of evangelicals, a portion of Protestants, a portion of Catholics that are up for grabs. They know a portion of Catholics are up for grabs because it's about 60-40. 60% of Catholics tend to vote Democrat. But
that isn't true. Last Pew Research, most Catholics, I think it was 55%, voted for Trump.
Evangelical stronghold, they are going to do everything they can to break down using religious sounding language to make it seem like the only Christian perspective is the progressive one.
That's so funny because it's actually what Allie's doing, right? Allie's the one who's using religious language to tell people that the only true biblical or Christian perspective, is for her they're synonymous, is to be like her. But I promise you, if you exist in that basement of fundamentalism, the second you get above ground, you know what you realize? You were actually under a house of Christian thought the entire time, and that there are hundreds of different rooms and wings of the Christian tradition that have all been there before Allie's version was even created. Modern American Calvinism is a new invention. Biblical inerrancy in the fundamentalist sense is a new invention. It is not in the ancient world. It's not how Paul thought about the Bible. You know why? Because the Bible wasn't even created yet when the Apostle Paul wrote his letters. So when you hear the verse, well, in the Bible it says all scripture is God breathed. Yeah, That's the Apostle Paul presumably writing, and he's not talking about the modern English Bible. It wasn't created yet. He's talking about the Hebrew, the Torah. And even then, God-breathed does not mean inerrant. It does not. So I wanted to be really clear. Allie's Christianity is a modern invention. It comes out of the modernist world, and there's a Scopes monkey trial. It's a whole thing. Maybe I'll do a long-form video on it to explain it to you. But do not think for a second that Allie is participating in some kind of historic Christian understanding of these beliefs. She is not. She's not. The Catholic social justice movement predates the Protestant tradition by 1,000 years. Loving the poor, being in solidarity with the oppressed is a Christian ethic that we see all the way almost from the beginning, because Christians started out as the oppressed. They started out as a minority. Don't let Allie fool you otherwise. She is ignorant as hell on Christianity, but she's so full of herself. She's so confident in her utter ignorance that she peddles this BS to millions of people.
He had a lot to say about his beliefs about abortion and things like that on Joe Rogan's podcast. We'll play some of that in a second. Let me pause and tell you about a very fitting sponsor. That is...
Okay, I'll fast forward through that. Friends, if you're enjoying this video, please make sure to give it a like. Subscribe to the channel. It means so much. Consider becoming a subscriber. I have a link in the bottom there. You can sign up to become a paid member. I have some fun perks. I'll announce this now if you made it this far in. I'm going to start doing more lives. I want to go live hopefully once a week on Wednesday nights and be able to respond to videos that you send me. So you can check out the link in the bottom and how to do all that. But I'm looking forward to kind of being a little more in the moment with you guys and kind of developing some kind of fun, live stream crowd that wants to tune in and watch me yap about whatever you guys send me. So thanks again for supporting me.
Conceived, and Mary becoming pregnant with Jesus somehow supports the pro-choice position.
I say all this in context of abortion because before God comes over Mary and we have the incarnation, God asks for Mary's consent, which is remarkable. I mean, go back and read this in Luke. I mean, the angel comes down and asks Mary if this is something she wants to do. And she says, if it is God's will, let it be done. Let it be. Let it happen. So to me, that is an affirmation in one of our most central stories that creation has to be done with consent.
First of all, his rendering of that story is completely untrue. Gabriel doesn't actually ask for Mary's permission there. Yes, she accepts God's will, and she should be honored for that. What an incredible blessing to be chosen as Jesus's earthly mother and to have your womb grow the Christ child. That is amazing. But she simply assents to what God has already decided and already chosen. This
is because she's a Calvinist. So in her mind, God decrees all things. People just submit. That's why she says this. I'm not going to get into the hermeneutic about this. I just don't know enough to give you guys a solid take. I did an interview or a response video with Kevin Carnahan. He kind of covered the issue of abortion in the Bible from a scholarly perspective. You can go check that out. It's about Josh Howerton. I think the title is Josh Howerton Doesn't Know the Bible or something like that. But yeah, you can go check it out there. I'm not going to wade into this one. I just don't know enough about it.
Actually consenting to that. It's not like a choice that she is making here. She simply is accepting the present reality, what God commands in that moment. And even if it were true that this went the way James Talarico said that it did, that Mary said, yeah, sure, you can do that. Go ahead and conceive Jesus. That isn't a justification for killing a baby after he or she has been conceived. To say that this passage about Jesus becoming flesh, becoming man, is a justification for poisoning or dismembering babies inside the womb is so absurdly evil.
I could have missed this, guys, because I've been going for a while, but I didn't hear him talk about abortion. I heard him talk about consent. So I'm not sure if I'm missing something here.
Love to debate James Talarico on that passage and on his excuse or justification for abortion. He also makes this very troubling comment about Jesus's crucifixion. He said Jesus was crucified for, quote, confronting the powerful.
That's true.
The second is crucifixion, right? That's Good Friday, where Jesus, because he confronts the powerful, is executed on a cross, a humiliating death along with other criminals.
So this is a very common refrain that you see from a lot of these so-called progressive Christians, that Jesus died because he was a revolutionary, because he fought against Roman power, and he fought against empire because he was progressive, and he fought for women and all of these things. Of course, that's not true. We actually did an episode about specifically who killed Jesus, who was responsible for that, why did that happen just a couple of weeks ago, and we will link that.
I'm not sure what her point would be here, because if you just read the 4 different gospel accounts, Jesus confronted the powerful, the religious powerful, and the empire. And he died a criminal's death. You know that crucifixions weren't allowed to be done to Roman citizens? Jesus himself wasn't a Roman citizen. He was a Jewish person under Roman occupation, and he died a criminal's death because he confronted the powerful. He confronted the religious elite of his day, and they worked in partnership with the empire to kill him. I'm not sure why that's controversial. When Jesus said, I've come to liberate the oppressed, he didn't just mean some spiritual reality. He meant real things. Liberate people from their oppression, give sight to the blind, and he did that. He did that physically. I'm not sure why this is a big deal for her.
But here ultimately is the answer, which is so different than what James Talarico said.
Give us
so
the
why
answer.
Christ actually died, number one, God willed it. Acts 2:23, this Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. Definite plan and foreknowledge of God. Also, number two, he died because of the fulfillment of prophecy. 1 Corinthians 15:3-4, for I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures.
This does not compete with the also reality that he was killed by confronting power. If you want to make sense of what this means post, absolutely. Then that's what the Apostle Paul is doing here. That's what the author of Acts is doing, right? They're making sense of what happened. But make no mistake, Jesus confronted the religious elite. They conspired with the empire to kill him. That's what the gospel accounts tell us in their own unique ways, different ways sometimes, competing even about the details. That's the general theme.
In accordance with the scriptures, this is something that was foreordained. Number three, to save sinners and reconcile us to God, Romans 5:8-10. But God shows his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For if
This is actually a great example.
we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his son. Much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life.
This is a great example of proof texting. Again, I don't have time to go into all the nitty-gritty here about the book of Romans, but people like Allie who believe in penal substitutionary atonement, they take specific passages and they paint this picture that we were under the wrath and punishment of God. Jesus took God's wrath on himself, paid the price. That's one view of the atonement, but there are other views of the atonement. In fact, penal substitutionary atonement is arguably one of the most recent developments in church history about what the crucifixion and death and resurrection of Jesus means. There's Christus Victor, there's healing atonement, there's all kinds of other theories that the church has posited about what does this symbolize. So again, I'm not saying Allie can't believe what she believes here, sure, but to paint the picture that this is all it is, that she has the right answer to this question, ignores the reality, the plurality of the way that the church historically has answered what does the death and what does the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ mean? What are its implications? Again, if Allie went to any kind of theology school, even one semester in freshman college, which is what I did, by the way, I did one year, you would know this. You would know this. Again, this is not what I'm saying is not controversial stuff, friends. Like N.T. Wright would probably agree with this. Probably even, I don't know, but even like the big apologist right now, Wes Huff, who's all over the right-wing circuit, even he would have to concede if he knew church history that there have been different ways of understanding the atonement. Even if he disagrees with them, they still exist.
So amazing. Also, Talarico's description of the resurrection in this interview as, quote, something where something beautiful and new rises from the ashes. It downplays the physical reality of Jesus rising from the dead. He uses the resurrection as an allegory, and this is really the prevailing view of people who call themselves progressive Christians. They tend to reject the historicity of the miracles of Jesus, including him defeating death days after he was crucified. Like everything else about Jesus, Talarico and others like him see Jesus as a moral example.
This is such a bad faith rendering of like progressive theology. There are certain, I guess, theologians, maybe John Shelby Spong, we can say is one of them, who would deny some of this stuff, but many progressive Christians would still affirm a physical resurrection, while also realizing that there's a chance that it might not be actually true. Because how would we know? This is the problem, right? Allie Stuckey's worldview is built on certainty. It's essentially modernism, but applied to the Bible, which is a major error because the Bible is not a modern book. The Bible was not written in a modern context. It's not trying to answer many of the questions that Allie is trying to answer. And so she comes from a tradition that pillages the Bible and sees it like a puzzle to put together to fit this idea of, is it true? Did these things really happen in history? The reality is that's not how biblical authors thought about history. Many of them add to the text. Many of them add their own narratives. Matthew's point in his gospel is different, has a different agenda than the gospel of Mark, which has a different agenda than the gospel of John and Luke. And again, this is known. This is a known thing. The authors have different agendas of how they're trying to paint Christ. So they add stories, some of which might not have happened. And the ones that did happen, we don't know for sure if they did. Because let's just use rational logic here. If we have none of the original writings, not one, we have not one original manuscript, and the earliest pieces we have are tiny little fragments. If we don't have the original manuscripts of what was written, and even then, there was a gap at several decades, I think by the earliest assessments, between Jesus living and dying in his life on earth and the earliest writings about Jesus, or the letters of Paul. And again, I'm not a scholar on this, so if someone's watching this and knows better, please leave a comment so you can correct me. But they're still several decades removed. I mean, imagine telling a story from 30 years ago, and then telling people this is exactly how it happened down to the letter. Even if I had it all on video, I'd still have a hard time telling you, right? So I'm just making the point of while I certainly affirm a physical resurrection, I also understand there's a leap of faith I'm taking, and I understand why many people would not agree with me. The last thing I'm going to do is pin this on certainty, though, on this idea of somehow this is absolutely true. We just don't know. We just don't know. We don't know if the miracles really happened. That's not being unfaithful. That's being faithful to the text. That's being honest about our assessment of an ancient world that we only have small glimpses into through a very murky window. That's just the reality. Do not let Allie sell you this version of certainty. It's a mirage and it crumbles. It crumbles under any kind of examination that is honest, because we don't have one original manuscript, or they call them autographs, of the Bible. Not one, not a single one. We're trusting the interpretation and the rewrites and the edits and the compilation and the assembly from all kinds of people throughout history to give us our modern English Protestant Bible. And even then, translators make certain decisions interpreting from Greek to English, or Hebrew to English, or whatever other language it might be. We trust all of that. We trust all of that, but it's still a leap of faith. We still don't absolutely know. And again, we have to be honest about this. It doesn't make me less Christian. I love the idea of a physical resurrection. I believe it. It reminds me that death does not have the final sting. It's beautiful. But I'm also not so foolish to pretend that somehow I have this absolute objective truth that I know for sure exists outside of my mind about a resurrection that happened supposedly 2,000 years ago. And the only stories I have are what's in this Bible, which, by the way, the 4 gospel accounts contradict each other. They don't all tell the same story. That's just honesty.
They see him as an activist. They see him as a revolutionary for progressive causes, like a cheerleader on the sidelines of their political fight. They see him as a mascot. There was a man by James Cone, and if you've been listening to Relatable since 2018, you know who James Cone is. We talked a lot about him from 2018 to 2020. He was a 20th century theologian, and he popularized something called liberation theology.
Black liberation theology, Allie. Don't you fucking come against James Cone. Now you're really going to be in my shitbox.
Specifically for him, Black liberation theology. But liberation theology is a school of theological thought to which Talarico holds that asserts that the Bible, the gospel, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the advancement of God's kingdom, the future hope that we have of a new earth and a new heaven is all actually about liberating the so-called oppressed. So fighting white supremacy on behalf of Black people, fighting immigration enforcement on behalf of immigrants, fighting capitalism on behalf of the poor, etc. Cone wrote this, quote, "This is what Christ's resurrection means. The oppressed are freed for struggle. for battle in the pursuit of humanity. So, like James Talarico, James Cone believed that every religion that speaks to the same truth, the truth of liberation, was a legitimate religion. So,
that's not, first of all, that's not what James Cone said in that quote. And that quote from James Cone, back up if I can a second here. Where is it? This is what Christ's resurrection means. The oppressed are freed for struggle, for battle in the pursuit of humanity. Yeah, that's beautiful. Christ's body was decimated. In fact, James Cone's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, which is a must read, he talks about how, just like how Christ was killed by the empire and suffered a humiliating death, black bodies that were lynched in the Jim Crow South suffered the same thing. And what he talks about is how in Christ, James Cone sees, right, the lynching. Christ was lynched in his own modern context. And what does that say about God? Because again, if Cone took his theology seriously, if he believed that Jesus was God, like I do, then what does this tell us about God? If God is willing to die the death of a criminal's crucifixion, right? And we can look at, and by the way, Christ was innocent, right? We can look easily at the black tradition in America and see the lynchings that happened at the hands of white supremacists who were hateful and vengeful towards innocent black people. What does this God tell us? Who is God in that scenario? Is it the one doing the oppressing? Is it the one doing the lynching? Or is it the person whose body is hanging? Who is Christ? That is thought-provoking, great stuff. Allie is so far up her own butt and so utterly ignorant, she can't even see it. And again, Allie, just go read the 4 Gospels. I have come to liberate the oppressed. It's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. In order to be born again, sell all your stuff. This is what Scott Coley calls his motivated literalism. Allie has no motivation to interpret those passages literally because they go against her interests and her political interests and her idea of capitalism.
This is what Christ's resurrection means. The oppressed are freed for struggle.
Through this.
For battle in the pursuit of humanity. So, like James Talarico, James Cone believed that every religion that speaks to the same truth, the truth of liberation, was a legitimate religion. So for him, the exclusivity of Christ and spiritual salvation from sin was really unimportant. And by the way, I just want to say that Martin Luther King shared these same beliefs about the gospel, about Jesus. He denied the resurrection. And this all reminds me.
Here's the racism, my friends. Here's the racism. Do you see how this feeds into the narrative that maybe the Civil Rights Act should have been passed, how MLK wasn't really a good person? This is what her friend Charlie Kirk would say. Allie is so dangerous because she convinces millions of mostly white women, right, of these beliefs that are so damaging to their neighbors. Instead of judgment, maybe Allie should listen to the black tradition. Maybe Allie should sit at the feet of someone like Reverend Otis Moss and hear what he has to say. Maybe she should actually read Black Theology and Black Power by James Cone and hear what he has to say and think critically and thoughtfully and reflect on these things. But no, because fundamentalism is not about curiosity. Fundamentalism is about protection. Protection from the other. Protection from being contaminated by an outside source that ruins our purity. That's what this is. That's what this is.
Actually, of a quote that just came to mind from C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters. Something that he writes in the voice of Screwtape, which is a demon, trying to advise his nephew on how to pull his patient, a human being, away from heaven, is that demons want to tempt us to use Christianity as a means to our political ends. And so here's a quote from the Screwtape Letters. We do want and want very much to make men treat Christianity as a means, preferably, of course, as a means to their own advancement, but failing that, as a means to anything, even to social justice.
I wish Allie would just read this for herself.
Enemy, who is God, will not be used as a convenience. Of course, that's what Talarico does. That's
exactly what Allie does. Allie uses God as a weapon for oppression. She uses God as a weapon to hurt her neighbors, as a convenience for political power, as a tool to gain more political power and to oppress her neighbors. That's what she's doing here. It's so clear.
Really just seeing God, seeing Jesus as a means to an end, a mascot in their version of politics and Christianity, and really the mascot of their form of Christian nationalism, because that's what Talarico represents.
Nope. Okay, I'm not gonna let her get away with this shit. I'm just not gonna do it, friends. I'm sorry. It's such bullshit. Again, read a fucking book, Allie. Just read a damn book. Like, get out of your own bubble for 10 minutes. Maybe start with this one, American Idolatry by Andrew Whitehead. He explains what Christian nationalism is and what it isn't. Newsflash, Christian nationalism is not being religious and voting based on your religious convictions. That's not what it is. Christian nationalism is a particular way of advancing political interests that's tied to conservative Christianity. It goes like this: we're a Christian nation, and we have to do everything in our power to keep America as a Christian nation. And that's tied to conservative, religious talking points like this. And it's built on power and control. If Allie had her way, if Doug Wilson had his way, right, most people in America would be under their boot. It would not be ecumenical. There would be no people who were Muslim or atheists allowed to serve in government. Women would not be allowed to serve in government. Again, watch my clip about Stephen Wolfe, the author of The Case for Christian Nationalism, where he says women can't lead, they're too empathetic. And what does Allie say? Toxic empathy. Okay, this is what Christian nationalism is. It's the idea that these people have to be in charge. Let's just say though, you know what, guys, while I'm in the moment, while I'm real fired up, let's say that Allie's right. Let's say I'm a progressive Christian nationalist. Let me tell you what kind of society I want to live in. You ready? I'm going to blow your mind. Get ready for this radical ideology. I want to live in a society where everyone has access to affordable, quality, universal healthcare, which can be done. I want to live in a society where all of my neighbors, even my MAGA neighbors and their kids, get access to affordable, high-quality education, including higher education. I want to live in a society where we're not worried about sending our kids to schools where they can get mowed down because we have a gun addiction, especially of high-powered rifles. I want to live in a society where my Muslim neighbor, my atheist neighbor, and I can find shared values over shared beliefs, where they have access to run for office, where women can choose to have a career or choose to be a stay-at-home mom or do both, just like how men can do, where my trans neighbor isn't in fear of their life, where they have access to healthcare, where their driver's licenses aren't revoked overnight like they were in Kansas because of Christian fundamentalism. I want to live in a world where my children experience different ways of living and realize that the world's bigger than their little tiny bubble, and that they are empathetic and that they want to love their neighbor well and learn that some people are different than them and that's okay. That's my version of progressive Christian nationalism. One that protects democratic ideals, that continues realizing them for all Americans. One that fights for reparations for the Black community, that, by the way, has just recently come out of, slavery and Jim Crow segregation. We're like 70 years tops out of 490 of Black oppression in this country. Maybe we can help fix that. Maybe we can think about more equitable systems that allow people to have access to the same opportunities that other people do. It's so night and day what we're advocating for. My faith teaches me to expand and to be more inclusive and to think about ways to love the other as myself. Allie's faith teaches her that she and her tribe have been chosen by God to rule over the country and over everyone else, and that everyone that's not like her is a threat to her way of being, which in her mind is the absolute truth. These are night and day differences.
Form of progressive Christian nationalism, he believes that his interpretation of the Bible should inform the law of the land. But if I were to say, well, Psalm 16 tells me very clearly that God knitted together all people in their mother's womb, that tells me a lot about the dignity and the sanctity of unborn life. I don't think that it would be good to legalize killing those babies inside the womb just because we can't see or hear them, or just because they're young or dependent. He would say that's fascism.
Well, imagine taking a poem and making that law for everyone else. That's crazy. Obviously, that's poetry. And by the way, science should inform these decisions. I would not want the Bible to be used as a cookbook or as a healthcare book. I don't want the Bible informing vaccines or Tylenol or how we make certain meals, because the Bible isn't designed for that. It's just not. I would not want people with horrible interpretations of the Bible to use it as a weapon for oppression.
Christian nationalism. Remember, it is only the conservative Christian that is told that we can't bring the fullness of our worldview into the public sphere and into the voting booth.
Because if you had your way, you would be eroding democratic principles and stopping people from the same rights that you have, Allie. That's the difference. Your right to swing your fist stops where someone else's face begins, but for you, you believe that your religious conviction dictates or mandates that you have the right to smash other people's faces in. How do you not see this? It's the same playbook as the white segregationists, right? I don't get it. If we're just good God-fearing Christians, why can't we be fully allowed to have our way out, politically? Well, because if you had your way, black people would still be segregated. Black people would still be getting lynched. That's why your religious ideals promote a fascistic worldview. They promote a world based on lies. You vote for a man who lies through his teeth, who is bombing people left and right. That's why. It's the same way that I don't want Nazis in the fucking government. Because your worldview sucks. 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 If anyone's out there who's like a moderate or a conservative Christian or whatever, I'm not sure who listens or watches this. My question to you is, why do you care so much about what a trans person does in their life? Why are you obsessed with someone else's life? You don't want them obsessed with your life. Would you like it if trans people were on a campaign to limit your religious freedom in this country? If they were on a campaign to stop you from going to church? If they were obsessed with what's in between your legs? No. Like, why the obsession? It's so dumb. We have such bigger fish to fry in this country. That's actually a problem. Our trans neighbors deserve full love and dignity and respect. Just leave them alone. Just don't think about them. Just move on with your life. Trust me, they don't want you involved. I promise. They don't like you either. So just stay far away and leave them alone.
Talarico, of course, believes that that's perfectly fine. Believes that that is how we actually should inform our policy. Talarico butchers the gospel. 1 Corinthians 1:18 says, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." This is why I say that Talarico is a left-wing atheist version of a good Christian.
Yeah, I think Allie's a total idiot. She's a fool. She is so prideful and arrogant. Again, her theology teaches her that she's been chosen. Telerico has not. She's not curious. It's honestly embarrassing. History will tell the story of Allie Stuckey and how utterly foolish she was. The audacity to make these claims. You're not God either, Allie. You're not God. And how you interpret the Bible is certainly not infallible. Even if the Bible was inerrant, your interpretation sucks. And it's just wild that she has this kind of like air about her where she's like, well, I could just, Telerico's an atheist. What? Like, who made you king of this stuff? Like, who? Who makes these rules up? You're just making stuff up. You have no authority. In fact, the Protestant Reformation was all about anti-authority. It was all about leaving the Catholic Church and doing your own thing, right? So, Allie, you can only do that consistently if you allow people to do that as well.
Because the things that he says totally make sense to the world. It's not foolishness to the atheist. Everything that Talarico says sounds really good to the person who rejects God. If everything we are saying as Christians makes sense to the non-believer, sounds good and persuasive at all times to the non-believer, that's not an indication that we're doing things well. That's an indication that we're going the wrong direction.
Or it's an indication that your theology is so shitty that even the world can see through it. Even the world, whoever they are, can read the words of Jesus and compare and contrast his words with your actions and say, something's amok here. This isn't consistent. Maybe that's it, Allie. But you see how this is like the persecution complex coming in. Because in evangelicalism, you're taught that the world's going to hate you. They're going to hate you because you're pro-life. They're going to hate you because you think being queer is a sin. That's gaslighting. They don't like you because you're constantly pushing against their rights. Because you have huge organizations that are being funded to take up cases to the Supreme Court to overturn a Obergefell. That's why they don't like you, because you can't stay out of their life. You have to infringe. You have to get your little tentacles in their life because you think you know better. That's why people don't like you, because you're a supremacist. And these are not issues, by the way, where like we're not talking about like murder or like, crime rates. We're talking about people who are different than you, queer people who exist and have existed. Not a big deal.
We read 1 Corinthians 1, we see that God flips everything on its head.
Agreed.
That he chooses what is foolish in the world to shame the wise, what is weak according to worldly standards to shame the strong. This is a stumbling block to the Jews, we read. It is folly to the Greeks, we read in 1 Corinthians 1. But
by the way, notice how this verse obviously has a context. What does a stumbling block to the Jew and folly to the Gentiles mean? I mean, I'm not a Jewish person. I'm not even a Gentile. There's something else going on here. But again, we're just cherry picking verses. And then we're saying this is what the Bible clearly teaches. If I did this, Allie would say I'm taking scripture out of context. But because she does it, all of a sudden it's in context and it's correct.
it is the power of Christ to those who believe. It is wisdom to those who believe. We sound like a stench of death to those who are not believing, but the fragrance of God to those who are.
Well, because you're kidnapping kids, Allie. Like, you're kidnapping children. You're killing people in concentration camps. Your government is shooting unarmed people at point blank range. It literally is death.
But Talarico truly believes that his form of Christianity needs to be enforced through the law. And he basically tells Ezra Klein this in his New York Times interview here in Saudi.
These politicians want a Christian nation unless it means providing health care to the sick, or funding food assistance for the hungry, or raising the minimum wage for the poor. And so it seems like they want to base our laws on the Bible until they read the words of Jesus. Welcome the stranger, liberate the oppressed, put away your sword, sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor. I mean, I'm not exactly sure a Christian nation is really what these people want.
Okay, so again, the hypocrisy there is just so obvious. He wants a Christian nation, apparently, and he believes that all of those things in the Bible should dictate our law.
First off, that's not what he said in that clip. He was making the point that people like you, Allie, are not consistent with what the Bible actually teaches at times. That's the point he's making. He's trying to highlight the discrepancy between your policies and what the Bible says, especially when it comes to the words of Jesus. He didn't say in that clip, this is what I think should be done because I'm a Christian. And by the way, one nice thing about being a progressive is that we can find shared values with people of other faiths or beliefs, regardless of how we get there. Me and my Muslim friend, Qasim Rashim, and my atheist friend, Andrew Seidel, can all come to the same conclusion that affordable healthcare promotes the human flourishing of my neighbors. Now, we get there differently. We have different beliefs, but we come to the same value, right? Same thing for immigration. Same thing for our trans neighbors, right? We can get there through reason and through working together and thinking about what promotes the well-being of our neighbor. Again, we know, we have data on this stuff. Gender-affirming care saves lives. We know that queer-affirming theology saves lives. We know that humane immigration policies save lives. We know that gun control saves lives. We know that access to abortion care also saves lives. Again, look at the states with draconian abortion bans. Look at the rise of infant mortality and maternal mortality rates. When Trump and the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, abortions actually went up slightly. Don't know how that saves lives, Allie. See, we can come together through different beliefs that people matter and that people deserve dignity and respect, all of them, regardless of their age, their race, their gender, their belief. I think Allie should have access to healthcare, affordable healthcare. I think Allie's kids should grow up in a society where they can go to college for free or really affordably. I don't care that Allie's MAGA. She still deserves dignity and respect and the same rights that my neighbors do. Allie does not believe that. That's the difference.
But if I have a different interpretation of the Bible, I cannot use that interpretation to inform my belief about public policy, because if I do, it's fascism or Christian nationalism or theocracy. He just wants his version of theocracy. By the way, Jesus did not say, welcome the foreigner and liberate the oppressed. Those are not things that Jesus said. If you're referring to the passage in Exodus that says you should welcome the sojourner, we have to read that in context, where we also read that there is one law for the foreigner and for the Israelite.
Okay. I got to pause. Hang on. Okay. Allie said, what did she say? Let's back it up a second ago.
This that says you should welcome the sojourner, we have to read that in Cannot use that interpretation to inform my belief about public policy, because if I do, it's fascism or Christian nationalism or theocracy. He just wants his version of theocracy. By the way, Jesus did not say welcome the foreigner and liberate the oppressed. Those are not.
Okay. Oh, I fast forwarded. My bad. Okay, this is Jesus speaking, Luke 4:17 through 19. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Pretty sure Jesus in this book of the Bible said that. Okay.
Welcome the sojourner. We have to read that in context, where we also read that there is one law for the foreigner and for the Israelite. There weren't these loopholes in which migrants could take part in all of the privileges and the rights and the protection of Israel without obeying the law. They had to be.
See the sleight of hand here? All of a sudden, we're now appealing to the Hebrew Bible, and we're trying to compare what was written to the ancient Israelites to American law, which, fine. If Allie wants to do that, that's no problem. If there is one law for both, I would agree. So why is this administration going after refugees who are here legally? Why are they revoking the immigration status of people who were here legally? Why? We have examples of that, countless. Why are they arresting American citizens who are brown-skinned, who are legal U.S. citizens? Even by her own standard, this administration is destroying that narrative, destroying it. They're obviously arresting people who are here legally, who have no criminal record, etc., who want to abide by the laws. You know how many people I've talked to or I've heard of who are undocumented, who want to become citizens, who want to go through the process but can't because our system is so broken? It's a crazy amount.
Circumcised. They had to follow all laws regarding sexuality and marriage and cleansing and ceremonies and all of that. And so I just think that if we are going to look at the Old or the New Testament to inform what we believe about policy, which I do think that we should, when we are exegeting and interpreting scripture within context and accurately in
this is the biggest joke of the whole video. She really thinks that that she interprets the Bible accurately and in context. She thinks that she interprets Genesis 1 and 2 accurately and in context. That's hilarious. That is honestly the funniest thing she's ever said. That is the funniest thing she's ever said. She's so far off base from that reality.
The rest of scripture in light of history and in light, most importantly, of the gospel, which is not something that he does. And he's actually making the case here that commands for generosity for the Christian in scripture should mean that we support forced wealth redistribution, that we should support the government forcing money out of the hands of some people and giving to others. But that's—
See the sleight of hand, right? We can read verses in Acts that no one had a need. We can read. Look, I'm just going to do it here, guys. I mean, we have time. I'm already, how far am I? I'm 2 hours in. If you're here, you're here for the whole thing. Let's just, again, this is the Bible. This is in the Bible that she claims is inerrant and perfect and is God's word to us. Come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you. Your riches have rotted, and your cloths are your cloths are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have rusted, and their rust will be evidence against you, and it will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure for the last days. Listen, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived in luxury. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in pleasure. You fattened your hearts on the day of slaughter. How come this verse isn't applied to the government, Allie? Why is your interpretation of a poem in Psalms somehow justification for entire draconian laws in the government? But this section that is pretty clear about rich people who oppress the poor, somehow, well, we can't force people to redistribute their wealth. Why? You'll force pregnant women to go through with pregnancies that are going to end in death and bleed out in the hospital room. But you don't want Elon Musk to pay his fair share of taxes? The man who's worth $400+ billion? That's a bridge too far? When we know that those wages or that money is absorbed fraudulently on the backs of a working class that does the labor for him, and is part of a stock market system where only 1% of Americans, the ultra rich, own 80% of the stocks? Suddenly, when it comes to capitalist causes, suddenly, guys, that's a bridge too far. No. The Bible has, when Jesus says a rich person must sell his possessions to enter the kingdom, we can't make that policy. No. That's progressive Christian nationalism. But when it comes to our take on homosexuality, from 4 verses in the Bible that are grossly misinterpreted, that has to be law for everyone. By the way, again, shared values over shared beliefs. Me and Costum and Andrew can all come to the value that ultra-rich people who are hoarding wealth at the detriment of their neighbors, who are working hard, right, trying to make a living, is wrong because it harms that neighbor, and the person who's hoarding it is being greedy, meaning they have way more than they can spend in 10,000 lifetimes. There's no reason they should have that much wealth. We can get there through 3 different methods. That's why it's not Christian nationalism, because I want to work together with people who are not Christian to find the common ground. Allie believes people like her have to be in charge of people like you and me. That's the difference.
What the Bible is talking about when it commands us to care for the poor. We are to be generous and charitable. That means not under compulsion, but in accordance to our free will. 2 Corinthians 9:7 tells us this. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver.
Okay, first off, this is Paul talking to the church, number 1. Number 2, I thought that we didn't have free will, Allie. Didn't you say at the beginning that everything is under God's sovereign rule? Didn't you quote R.C. Sproul, there's not one maverick molecule? There's no free will here. God has ordained all of these things, right? So see how it's always convenient? Whatever gives her power and control, whatever proves her point, she'll use. Suddenly now we have free will. Suddenly now this verse in 2 Corinthians 9:7, right, is talking about public policy in a secular government. So therefore we can't force billionaires to pay their fair share. That's horrible. God, guys, I hope you're hanging in there, and I hope you see how unserious this person is.
We know that taxes are compulsory. Taxes are something that you have to give or else you will go to jail. So taxes don't count as following Christ's command to be generous and kind to others. Yet Talarico says that it's actually the right that has co-opted Christianity. Sot 9.
They convinced a lot of our fellow Christians that the most important issues were abortion and gay marriage.
True.
2 issues that aren't mentioned in the Bible,
Yep.
2 issues that Jesus never talked about.
Yep.
Jesus in Matthew 25 tells us exactly how you and I and every one of our fellow believers, how we're going to be judged and how we're going to be saved. By feeding the hungry,
Yep.
by healing the sick, by welcoming the stranger. Nothing about going to church, nothing about voting Republican. It was all about how you treat other people.
Okay, Jesus does talk about marriage and sexuality. Matthew 19:4-5, he makes it very obvious what the definition of marriage is. He goes all the way back to creation. Also, of course, abortion is talked about. It's actually included in the big 10 commandments. Thou shalt not murder.
Abortion's not murder. That's the problem. That's the fallacy I was doing here. Really quick, because again, why not? We're here. Let's go to Matthew 19. I need to show you how asinine this person is, like how they really mistreat the Bible in so many ways. So this is a very classic clobber passage to prove that God defined marriage between one man and one woman. But here's the issue. They're talking about divorce. And again, let's use Allie's logic. What's the context? Well, Jesus, who's a Jewish person, is talking to Jewish people about the Torah. We're not talking about what marriage is. We're talking about the Torah and the laws around divorce. That's the context. There's no category here for gay marriage because it didn't exist in Jesus' time like it does in our time. Okay, there's no context. There's no world where that's a thing in this context. Jesus, the story is some Pharisees came to him, and to test him they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause?" He answered, Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two flesh, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. They said to him, Why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and divorce to her? He said to them, It was because you were so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but at the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery. Couple things here. Number one, obviously talking about divorce, not about what marriage is or isn't regarding gay marriage or straight marriage. Number two, hopefully Allie doesn't believe this bottom part, because what about abuse? What about if a wife is getting beat by her husband? Should she not get divorced because Jesus said this? No, of course not. In fact, the church makes exceptions, thankfully, all the time, hopefully, in cases like that, right? Jesus only says except for adultery. He doesn't say in case of abuse. By the way, Jesus never condemns polygamy here, and certainly Jesus knew the Torah. He knew the story. He knew that Jacob married his two cousins who were sisters. He doesn't condemn that at all. And then he goes on. His disciples said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. But he said to them, not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made by eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. Okay, really quick, just gonna do a little plug. Do I have it? Yeah, okay, I do have it here. This book, Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say, by Dr. Jennifer Bird, a scholar on this, talks about eunuchs and how her argument is that eunuchs in the ancient world were kind of seen like a third gender type. They weren't fully male, weren't fully female. Some were castrated. In fact, sometimes they'd be used to sleep with women because they couldn't get them pregnant. So even in that context, we have a kind of gender bending category called eunuchs that Allie totally ignores. Totally ignores. Do you see now why I get so worked up over this? Because she's so untruthful. She's such a propagandist. She's ignoring the context. She's ignoring the historicity of that passage. And she's adding on her own interpretation. But then she has the audacity to say, I'm being biblical and faithful to the text.
Not murder. And of course, we know that Christ doubles down on all of the 10 commandments by saying it's not just about what you do. It's not just about following the letter of the law. It's about following the spirit of the law down to the heart, which, by the way, you can't ever do perfectly. And that is why Christ came to pay for your debt and to pay for your sin on the cross and to defeat death 3 days later. But yes, of course, the Bible speaks very clearly about condemning murder and condemning any sexuality outside of one man and one woman in the context of marriage. And so,
okay, if it condemns murder, what do you think our government is doing to the Iranian people? Right, Allie? I mean, Allie was the one who celebrated us bombing boats in international waters. So Allie's okay with murder if she thinks those people deserve murder. If they're kids in Gaza, it is what it is. If they're school children in Iran, it is what it is. Allie makes exceptions for her own rules. The hypocrisy is overflowing.
he's just lying to you there. So Talarico is attempting to get the mushy middle. He knows he's got all of the Democrats, but he is also attempting to get your friends. He's attempting to get those in your mom group who don't really pay attention to politics until it starts going viral on her Instagram feed. He is appealing to the women that believe in every form of left-wing propaganda, who might be instinctively or because of their husbands or because of their parents conservative, but they believe the stories that are presented to them by the New York Times, by the influencers or the celebrities they follow.
Notice how Allie has to completely gaslight her base. Don't believe the videos of immigrants being brutalized. Don't believe the stories from the New York Times documenting this regime's horrific acts of abuse. Don't believe the story that Pete Hegseth spent $20 million on steak and lobster tail in 1 month. Don't believe that. No, that's all propaganda. It is what Jared Stacy calls disreality. She lives in a state of disreality, a world that is not steeped in what's actually happening. It's not a world in objective truth. That is a reality outside of our minds. It's a world of propaganda. That's what Allie does. I'm not sure how much she gets paid. I'm not even sure who funds her. She is really good at giving her audience propaganda and reversing everything to fit this nationalist, Christo-fascist world that supports policies that are literally killing people, foreign and domestic.
To like his disposition. They're going to like how gently he speaks.
Just
he
like
is going to say things that sound familiar to them, and because they sound familiar and sound Christian, they're going to be compelling. They're going to be persuasive. Our responsibility is to continue to push back in truth and gentleness and persuasiveness using the word of God. So when you see your friend sharing a James Talarico post, when you see them misusing scripture to justify the support of abortion, I want you to be fully equipped to be able to push back against them. Nicely, kindly, of course, with respect, but completely unapologetically. And if you don't know what to say, just ask a question, give a counterverse, give a counterpoint, send this podcast and say, well, will you listen to this and tell me what you think about it? And then we can discuss it later, especially if you have that kind of friendship with them.
I want to be clear here, because I grew up in this world. This is not about dialogue or conversation. It's about conversion. There is nothing that Allie could see or hear or read that will change her mind on any of these issues. Jesus Christ himself could visit her in the flesh in her bedroom and tell her, you're wrong about these issues. And she'll tell you that was Satan. That was Satan disguised as an angel. There is nothing at all that will convince Allie to change her positions on any of this. Because why would she? It benefits her. She's been a New York Times bestseller. She tours the country. Millions of people listen to her. She's hailed as a faithful gospel preacher, hero person, you know, who's helping women find true faith. She has every incentive to stay right where she is. And the people that she's telling this to have the same incentive because they don't want to be on the wrong side because they're on God's side. Evangelicalism is never about curiosity. They will pretend to be curious so they can convince you of their position. I talked to several apologists behind the scenes for a long time. I eventually gave up because I realized it's not about dialogue. It's about getting 1,000 questions out of me to lead me to their conclusions. They're never going to change their mind. I'm telling you, there's nothing you could do. If we have a man who is running the country, who is all over the Epstein files with credible allegations of child sexual abuse, and the big 5-alarm fire in their space is James Talarico, there is nothing that you can say that will change their mind. There's no videos that you can send them. There's no, there's no document that you can give them. There's no video. There's nothing you can give them that will change their mind on these issues. Because it's not about change, it's about protection.
Really encourage you, like especially if you're in the state of Texas, I really encourage you to read Toxic Empathy.
Ugh,
and you can get it from your
burn
library.
it.
I don't care if
Burn
you buy
that
it, you can
book.
borrow it from a friend, but I just really want you to be equipped
It's a horrible
with the
book.
facts, with the biblical truth to be able to push back against that. I didn't know who James Talarico was when I first started writing Toxic Empathy, but really my entire book is a response to that kind of completely erroneous form of Christianity, which pushes bad and destructive and deadly policies, but
How?
also is a kind of theology that truly damns the soul.
What is the destructive policy? What is it? Tell me the destructive policies. I can give you Trump's. And also notice how she said damning the soul, right? For her, this is a matter of life and death spiritually. This is a matter of heaven and hell for her. Because again, she believes that she's been chosen by God, while James Telerico has not been. It's elitism at its finest.
The soul, because it doesn't present to you a true gospel but a false one. So you shouldn't vote for him, but certainly you shouldn't
Hang in
follow
there,
his
friends.
teaching
This is
either.
a long
All right,
one.
A little bit of a history lesson, which I think gives us context in just a second. Let me pause, tell you about our next sponsor, and that is Preborn. So
You guys doing okay? You guys breathing all right? I know this is a long one, but I heard that you guys like long videos like this, so I believe you. And I got myself ready mentally for this, to sit in here no matter how long it takes. Here we are. So give the video a like, subscribe to the channel. If you want to support me and the videos that I make, there's a link at the bottom. Check it out. It'd be so helpful for me and my family. I'm committed to doing this as long as you'll have me. So I really appreciate it.
Okay, so the liberation theology and the liberal theology that he espouses, it comes from a lot of places, but we can actually look to the history of the Presbyterian Church to see where all of this comes from. So Talarico is actually the fruit of a century-long downgrade in mainline Presbyterianism.
So stupid.
Presbyterianism is a denomination that traces its roots to the Protestant Reformation, and so you can look to incredible Scottish reformers like John Knox. You can even look to the reformer John Calvin. But around the turn of the century, so we're talking the 20th century, and the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America, so that was the denomination, some began to push for doctrinal updates to match modern science and culture. So, for example, in 1923, the New York Presbytery ordained 2 Union Seminary grads who denied Christ's virgin birth, sparking outrage from other presbyteries. Liberals responded with something called the Auburn Affirmation, which claimed to protect PC USA unity and liberty and labeling doctrines like virgin birth, atonement, resurrection as non-binding theories, so like secondary or tertiary issues that didn't infringe upon the faithfulness of the gospel.
I just want to point out something that might shock you, but the Apostle Paul never talks about the virgin birth. The virgin birth is never mentioned by Paul. So was Paul not a Christian? The Trinity, not in the Bible the way we understand it. It was developed later on over time. I'm not saying that most Christians throughout history, since its inception, have not believed it. No, they have. But to make it seem like this is what every Christian for all time has ever believed, it's just not true. I'm sorry, it's not. It's not. The virgin birth is never mentioned by Paul, and there are good arguments to make that the word virgin doesn't exactly mean someone who never had sex before. I'm not saying it's correct, but I'm saying there are arguments to make, even from the biblical text. But again, when your world is stuck in binaries and fundamentalism, you can't be open to learning new things. You think that you have this static truth that supersedes all time. The fatal flaw is that you don't realize that even the truths that you believe came out of a certain time and space in human history and were created by men that you now believe. Not by God, by men.
Over 1,200 ministers signed that by 1924. And so this liberalism that we're seeing from people like James Talarico is not new. In the 1970s, debates in the Presbyterian Church in the United States, so that's PCUS, increased about biblical authority, the ordination of women, the church's relationship to modern culture, and
segregation. White fundamentalist evangelicals like Allie's tribe are all about maintaining that the races stay separate. Jerry Falwell, the founder of the Moral Majority, got politicized not over abortion, but over school integration. So yeah, these are two different schisms here. One pushed for segregation. One pushed for slaveholding. The Southern Baptist Convention, the largest evangelical conglomerate today, split over their Baptist brethren in the 1845 over the right to own other human beings. She doesn't mention that.
Conservatives opposed ordination of women. They believed in biblical inerrancy. And then in 1973, conservatives left the Presbyterian Church of the United States, which would later merge with PCUSA, that other liberal denomination that is the denomination of Talarico. And then the PCUSA has become more and more progressive over time, highlighted in the views that you've seen from Talarico. They affirm the full inclusion of LGBTQ plus people. They have since the 2010s.
Great.
Also emphasizes advocacy for the quote unquote marginalized groups, so-called racial justice, immigration reform, opposition to war, economic equity. These are all euphemisms for communism, basically. The PCUS.
Yeah, guys. Yeah, we don't want war is code for communism. By the way, do you know that white segregationists in the South would fight against MLK by calling MLK a communist? They would say that race mixing is communism. They would say that race mixing is socialism, it's Marxism. Like, they would say that. It's the same stuff, guys. Allie is in the same tradition that has birthed so much hatred in America in the name of God. She doesn't recognize that, or she ignores it, but that's the truth. The idea that we don't want war because Jesus, shocker alert, Allie, says love your enemies, and that maybe war only births more war and more violence, right? Somehow that's communism? You're kidding, right? Like, you can't be that foolish. You're kidding.
Is now the largest Presbyterian denomination in the U.S., so it's much bigger than the PCA, which includes churches that are faithful to Scripture, but it's in decline. The denomination had about 2.7 million members in 1994, but only about 1 million in 2024, so that's a huge decline. And in contrast, the PCA, which is the second largest U.S. Presbyterian denomination, has seen robust growth, outpacing population increases, up 1.84% in 2024. And so what's really interesting is that if you look at all of the mainline Protestant denominations that espouse the kind of progressive beliefs that James Talarico has, they're all in decline. People are realizing that if you're just going to hear from church all of the same things that you're hearing from social media and your favorite liberal activist, there's no real reason to go to church.
Okay, this isn't, first off, this is a red herring, or a straw man. I mean, church attendance in general is down. White evangelical churches have had a mass exodus. 15 million plus people have left. The SBC is down. She won't tell you that. She'll probably point to there's a study that was done that was really poorly done, by the way, that said Gen Z is returning to church at record numbers. That surveyed kids who were already in church. Okay? Not the case, if you hear that.
Community from your friends. You can go to brunch instead of taking communion. You can basically just scroll through TikTok and you can hear what's equivalent to a liberal sermon every day without ever having to leave your house. And so if you're not getting...
But if that's true, couldn't you do the opposite, Allie? Couldn't you listen to Charlie Kirk and get a MAGA-loving, church service? This is so stupid.
The truth of the gospel. If you're not getting a faithful exegesis of God's word, if you're not getting true accountability and confession of sin that is supposed to occur in the body of Christ, then there's no point in going to church. That's why these mainline denominations are declining. What's interesting is that the popularity and culture of so-called liberal Christianity is increasing. And that is because, again, James Talarico's form of Christianity is the atheist's favorite form of Christianity. It is Satan's favorite form of Christianity. Remember, Ephesians 2 tells us that Satan is the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once walked in the past.
Talk about not taking the Bible in context. What does that have to do with James Talarico, a man who's fighting for the well-being of all of his neighbors? This is evil, man. What's evil is this hour-long monologue from Allie about James Talarico. Ignore the man in the White House who's assaulting people and bombing children. get mad at the guy who's like, you know, trans people deserve access to healthcare too.
Of our flesh. And so that is what is going on. Of course, the culture, the sons of disobedience, the prince of the power of the air want the popularization of this kind of Christianity.
Why?
Because it's not Christianity. Because it's not a belief in Christ. It's not a belief in the gospel. And it's sending people to hell. And so again, we as Christians,
which under her own worldview is predestined. Allie, if God is in charge of all of this, including all of this bad stuff, why do you care? Why? Right? I mean, why? If they're predestined for hell, let them burn. Why fight this? Why? If nothing that you do changes the will of God, why are you doing this? Oh my God! There are countless inconsistencies. There are countless contradictions. There are countless hypocritical moments. I mean, every accusation is a freaking confession for this person. She claims James Talarico doesn't take the Bible in context. And here she is butchering the Bible for her own ridiculous MAGA agenda. Taking verses about Satan and applying them to James Talarico as if that's in context. Like, are you freaking kidding me? How does she sleep at night thinking that somehow she's owning the libs here? Has it ever occurred to people like Allie that maybe people want empathetic people in charge who will, I don't know, advocate for some kind of like society where we're not kidnapping 5-year-olds and putting them in detention centers where they get sick and almost die? I know that might be shocking to Allie to hear that a lot of people are still empathetic and don't think that it's toxic. I'm like, whoa, how? How do you think this way?
The responsibility to push back against this with everything we can, both because the policies end in destruction for people's bodies. It ends in economic destruction. It ends in unrest. It ends in chaos. It ends in borderlessness, which is a form of chaos. It is anti-Christ, anti-Bible, anti-order, anti-loving our neighbor in every single way. It just sounds palatable, and that's not enough. It just feels good, and that's not enough. But again, also because it is a false gospel that if people believe it will lead them to hell.
She is lying about everything. She is confessing her own sins. What she believes is Antichrist. Read the words of Jesus. Go do it. Go read the Beatitudes. Go read the teachings of Jesus. Compare and contrast it to the policies that Allie has voted for and defends at every freaking turn. Does Allie not think that we are not experiencing mass chaos right now under this administration? A year ago, Elon Musk was given a hatchet to chop up USAID, causing chaos all throughout the world. People not able to get access to vaccines, food going spoiled that was designed for kids in Afghanistan. Experts put the death toll because of those cuts at 100,000 plus. That's not chaos? The fact that we have masked ICE agents roaming our streets with impunity, that's not chaos? The fact that they've killed at least 2 citizens who were unarmed, 1 execution style, that's not chaos? Like, Allie, look around. Trump is the agent of chaos. Trump is the agent of confusion. If you're going to make the connection, if you're going to try and pull any comparison, considering that the word the Satan means the adversary, and that in the biblical narrative, Satan or the devil is the one who's sowing chaos and working with humanity to create hell on earth, who's creating chaos right now? Who's in charge of our government right now? And how's it looking? Gas prices are up because we're bombing Iran. We're killing people over there. Our economy didn't add any jobs last month. We lost jobs. Wages are still down. Our healthcare is more unaffordable because they gutted the Affordable Care Act subsidies through the COVID era. They shut down the government and wouldn't reopen it because they wanted food stamps to go away. How is this giving life? Like, how? Have you looked around, Allie? Like, how your blinders are ridiculous. So you have to just be, your head has to be so far up Trump's you know what to think that somehow you're smelling roses. It's absurd.
We have to love our neighbor more than allowing them to believe James Talarico, okay?
Oh my
So this
God.
is a spiritual battle that we're in far more than it is a political battle. The political battle is up here, what we see. The spiritual battle is what we don't see. But we as Christians who have been given this insight and this vision by the Holy Spirit to see the spiritual battle
Pure
that's waging,
elitism.
as Ephesians 6 tells us, we have a responsibility to speak up against this, even if that means you lose friends, even
really
if that means people
Gnosticism.
unfollow you, even if that makes you unpopular, even if
This is very Gnostic. The idea of like a secret truth that no one else has. That's what this is.
you get pushback, even if that divides. Truth divides. Truth divides. And this is not just about politics. This is about what is true.
The truth divides piece is really key. I always tell people that Christian nationalists do not want to work together with other people. They want to command and conquer. And Allie just gave the justification for it. The way it works is people like Allie believe that they're on the side of truth, which is comical, hopefully. But hopefully by now you can see how stupid that idea is. How many lies and nonsense theories that she believes to be true that are not. But they're on the side of truth. Truth divides. We cannot compromise with darkness. Democrats are evil and dark and not truth tellers. Therefore, we will not work together with them. That's the logic here. This is why I say, whenever I see Democrats trying to, reach across the aisle with Christian nationalists, like when Gavin Newsom had Charlie Kirk on his show, I'm like, what are you doing? Charlie Kirk is not there to find the common ground. Charlie Kirk is there to destroy you. Charlie Kirk is there to take over and to never give control back to the evil left. We're dealing with a militant faction of Christian nationalists who believe that God has given them a divine calling to take over the country and to rule it. And you just saw an hour-long justification for how this logic works and what it's built on.
It's eternally true, not just politically true. All right, we're going to shift gears just a little bit. We've got a new segment for you.
All right, good. What is this segment? Is it worth even watching? Hold on, let me take a look here. No. Let me take a look. I'm just scrolling here. Nah, we'll leave it there. If we're done with Talarico, I'm done with this. Oh my goodness, friends. Well, we made it. I mean, 1 hour, 2.5, whatever. It is what it is. I mean, this is part of what I like to do. This is part of what I feel like I need to do as I'm talking way too fast. This is part of what I feel like I need to do as a former Christian nationalist. I grew up in this world. I grew up believing what Allie believes. I've read all the books. I've heard the theology. I know all the names. I've tracked it for a long time. I'm still very much a Christian, but I got above ground. I walked up the stairs, opened the door, was ready to be in a zombie wasteland. Shocker alert, turned out I was in a huge house full of beautiful rooms in the Christian tradition that did not force me to choose between loving my neighbor or loving God. It turned out the way that other Christians see the world is that we demonstrate our love for God by how we love our neighbor. All of our neighbors. And our version of love is not some kind of hateful, we take away your rights, put you back in the closet, take away your health care kind of love. It is a human flourishing, data-informed version of love that knows in the world's richest country, we can have nice things. If we can pay billions of dollars for war, to drop missiles in Iran, we can pay billions of dollars to figure out the healthcare system. We just choose not to. All right, friends, I'm not going to belabor the point anymore. I've yapped for a long time. If you've enjoyed this video, please let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you like more of this extra long form type of response content, or if you kind of get sick of it at some point. I like knowing that. It helps me when it comes to shaping this kind of content for the channel. I'll keep you all posted on going live. And again, if you want to support the work I'm doing, please consider becoming a member or a one-time supporter of the channel. There's a link down below. I use Buy Me a Coffee because they take a very low commission, only 5%, as opposed to what this platform takes, which is like 30%. So it actually does me a huge solid to click that link and sign up. It helps me and my family out so much. So, all right, friends, catch y'all next time. See ya.